Chapter 1. Chapter Text. Izuku Midoriya collapsed onto his cell's cold, hard floor and immediately curled into a fetal position. His injuries pulsed painfully on his skin, and he vaguely heard the cell door shut behind him. Izuku shuffled to the corner, body shaking from the pain and the brisk air of the room. His session with Sensei went on longer than normal, and it was a lot rougher this time around. Usually, he would write down the most recent developments for his own peace of mind, but he couldn't even manage to sit up on his own. He tried to think about anything else to distract himself, but he couldn't stop feeling the hurt. He gave up, instead trying to fall asleep. He woke up to a sudden bang overhead. Izuku blearily blinked his eyes open, not being able to tell how long he had been out for. He carefully pulled himself into a sitting position, leaning heavily against the wall as he did so. Izuku whimpered quietly as he adjusted, looking up to see if what he heard was real or a part of his dreams. As he strained his hearing, he could tell there was some sort of fight going on upstairs. It was too muffled for him to make sense of what was going on, and the pounding headache wasn't helping either. Izuku must have nodded off again because he startled awake to the sounds of shouting right outside his door. Izuku flinched and pulled his legs to his chest, making himself as small as possible. Next, he heard grunts of pain or frustration. He couldn't tell, and then it went silent. A moment later, some shuffling feet were coming towards his cell, and he could make out a shadow beneath the door. Izuku curled tighter against the wall, scared to see what, or who, would be coming inside. As Izuku held his breath in anticipation, the door opened with a soft click. Shoyuta Aizawa knocked out another villain, his capture weapon carrying him over to the pile of two other men he had disarmed. Shoyuta tightened the zip ties on his wrist and sent a signal to Detective Tsukachi on his phone, letting him know he needed backup to take them to the station later for questioning. Tsukachi received a tip that this building was being used as a villain hideout for a Quirk trafficking operation, and he asked Shoyuta to investigate since it fell within his patrol route. It was a relatively small building that used to be a bar by the looks of the interior. With no other villains making an immediate appearance at the moment, Shoyuta cautiously made his way forward. He stayed alert as he walked towards the back of the room towards a door leading to who knows what. Capture weapon ready for attack, he opened it, only to find no one there. Instead, a set of stairs greeted him, leading to the building's basement. He crept down the stairs, taking in his surroundings as he got to the bottom. The last step led to a small hallway that only opened up to the left. Shoyuta peeked around the corner, and it was definitely bigger than the upstairs. The hallway spanned down at least 25 to 30 meters, with two doors on the right side and one on the left. Just as he was about to investigate further, the door on the left swung open and two figures emerged. Shoyuta hid himself on the stairs, only slightly peeking around the corner so he could assess the situation. The taller of the two had strong, built muscles, black, curly hair, and sported a simple gray t-shirt and black pants. The other was interesting. The villain wore a formal suit and tie, but where skin should be showing, there was black mist. He had glowing yellow eyes and a metal collar wrapping around the whole neck. They were making their way towards the closest door on the right. "Get the brat," the one with black hair hissed out, "or we're both in trouble." Shoyuta frowned, eyebrows furrowed as the mist villain raised a hand towards a red, glowing panel just next to the door. It blinked green. Shoyuta could not let them get to whoever was inside, so he leapt forward, Quirk activated, and his capture weapon shot towards them. It would have wrapped around the mist villain's arm, but he was surprisingly quick and jumped out of the way on the other side of the hallway. "Shit, we don't have time. Go," the black-haired man shouted, and he turned to face Shoyuta. His mouth opened, and Shoyuta could see his throat lighting up, but he turned his quirked gaze onto him, and it promptly stopped whatever quirk, most likely fire breathing, from activating. The man faltered, and Shoyuta used that distraction for granted and landed a punch right on his face. Before he could recover, Shoyuta kicked the man in the stomach in quick succession, which caused him to fall backwards onto the floor, and he landed just behind the mist villain. Shoyuta could hear police sirens in the distance, which resulted in the panicked looks on the villains' faces. Shoyuta shot his capture weapon out again quickly, aiming to restrain them before the police arrived, but the black mist suddenly transformed into a sort of warped portal. The other villain scrambled through, and as it shut, Both disappeared. Shoyuta cursed and brought his capture weapon back to his neck, taking a moment to breathe. He scanned his surroundings once more and made sure no one else was present. After he confirmed he was alone, he made his way to the door the two villains were trying to get through and promptly pushed it open. The first thing he noticed was how dark it was inside, the only light coming through the hallway behind him. It illuminated a small room of concrete walls, floors, and ceiling, with nothing present except a few stacks of what looked like several notebooks and writing utensils. Shoyuta heard a small gasp from the far corner, and he turned to see a child. He couldn't see much, but from what he did see, the boy was small. He had long, matted, green curly hair and clothing not appropriate for such a cold room. He wore a tattered white t-shirt, pants that ended just above the ankle, and a light gray, singular cuff around his left wrist. If Shoyuta had to guess, he would think it was a Quirk suppressor. Shoyuta opened the door further so more light could flit into the room, and he could clearly see the boy in front of him. Once he did, he inhaled sharply through his nose. He was covered in scars and bruises that looked fresh. When Shoyuta stepped further into the room, slowly, the boy pushed further back into the wall behind him. Shoyuta stopped and crouched instead, trying to seem as non-threatening as possible. "Hey kid," he said, voice quiet. "I'm a pro hero. I want to help you get out of here, okay?" Though he tried to calm him down, it did not seem to be working. The kid was still trembling and staring at him in fear and disbelief. Man, he was terrible with kids. He wished Hisashi were here to help. Izuku stared at the figure in front of him, hesitant to believe he was who he said he was. He didn't look like any of the villains that frequented the place, but he couldn't be too sure. Plus, Sensei did not have any reason to stage a rescue. With all the fighting he heard earlier, maybe this man was a hero. Izuku just had a hard time believing that, after all this time, he was potentially being saved. He shouldn't get his hopes up, though. Sensei could still be around, and he didn't want this man in front of him to get hurt. Izuku slowly uncurled from the wall, eyes roaming over the supposed hero. Long black hair, yellow goggles resting on his head, a light gray scarf around his neck, black clothing, and a utility belt. He didn't recognize him, but that didn't automatically mean he wasn't a hero. After the prolonged silence, Izuku almost expected the man to get irritated at the lack of response, but he only sat there patiently. Izuku bit his lip and decided to warn him instead. "Why you should leave. He will hurt you," he whispered, his throat hurting from disuse. His eyes darted between the hero and the very open door behind him, leaving them both exposed for anyone to see. The hero didn't seem worried, though. With a shake of his head, he answered, "No one else is here. They all left or are being taken to the police station. You're safe." Izuku frowned. Safe? Left? Sensei had just left him there? Izuku doubted he had been captured, and the fact that he was still talking to the hero proved that Sensei was not here. He was confused, but relieved. Was he allowed to feel that way? Not having an answer, the hero spoke up again. "My name's Eraserhead. What's yours, kid?" Izuku wrung his hands together and glanced at him with uncertainty. Just as he was about to respond, he could hear more footsteps coming down the stairs and a muffled, "Eraserhead," called out from the hallway. Izuku froze and shrank back against the wall again. Eraserhead muttered something under his breath that Izuku couldn't hear and slowly rose to stand. "Don't worry, they're here to help," he assured. But Izuku didn't feel any less scared. Eraserhead turned, and he seemed to be talking to whoever called him in the hallway, though it was too low for Izuku to make out. Eraserhead ended the conversation with a nod, and he turned back to face Izuku, his expression softening. He kneeled on the floor this time, but still kept his distance. "There's a team of medics on their way. They will be able to help clean up your injuries. They won't do anything to hurt you, I promise," Eraserhead offered, keeping his voice low and stance open. Izuku relaxed a bit from where he was sitting. His body was exhausted from the stress he had endured over the past few hours. His head still hurt, too. Could he really trust this? Izuku nodded hesitantly in lieu of a response, and Eraserhead nodded back. "Can you stand?" Izuku shook his head, and the hero hummed. "That's all right. Is it okay if I carry you?" Izuku paused. He wasn't used to this, being asked if he was okay with something. He almost didn't know how to respond. If the hero wanted to hurt him, he would have done so already. After a few more seconds of deliberation, Izuku nodded. Eraserhead seemed relieved, but it was only for a moment before he neutralized his expression and stood. All right, kid, let's get you out of here. Chapter 2. Shoyuta hated hospitals. The strong scent of antiseptic, the glaring white walls, and the overall air of melancholy that permeated the halls did not make for an enjoyable experience. He was only here for the kid he had rescued several hours prior. While Shoyuta had only intended to get the kid checked over by a team of medics, there were a lot of underlying issues and conditions that needed to be monitored in an actual hospital. This posed a problem since the kid would barely let the medics on site look him over. Shoyuta walked toward the ambulance waiting outside the bar, holding the kid in his arms. As he was setting him down onto the stretcher, the kid tightened his hold around Shuta's neck. Shoyuta straightened, rubbing slow circles on the kid's back to soothe him. I know it's scary, but they need to check your injuries, okay? I'll be right beside you, he whispered. The child was trembling, but his arms loosened with a nod. Shoyuta gently set him down on the stretcher, and he stood beside him as promised. One of the medics, a young woman with striking eyes, approached him with a kind smile. She introduced herself as Akiyama and explained how her quirk allowed her to check a person's vitals as long as she had skin-to-skin contact. Akiyama asked the kid directly if he would be okay with that. As expected, he hesitated, but what Shoyuta didn't expect was the kid looking to him for reassurance. Shoyuta softened his expression and nodded. It's okay. She won't hurt you. The kid shifted on the stretcher and turned to face Akiyama. Oh, okay. He consented to the procedure, and the medic telegraphed her movements so she wouldn't cause him any more panic. She rested her hand on the kid's left arm, just above the cuff. Despite knowing what would happen, he still flinched, but did not pull away completely. Akiyama's eyes glazed over as her quirk began processing his vitals, and it only took a few seconds before her hand lifted off his arm. The kid relaxed ever so slightly, seemingly relieved to have no one touching him. He is severely malnourished, and his body temperature is slightly lower than it should be. Nothing to be immediately concerned about. He doesn't have any hypothermic symptoms at the moment, but it is best if we monitor his well-being properly. He also seems to have a lot of fractured and broken bones that did not heal correctly. He needs to be transported to a hospital. Akiyama's voice is almost robotic as she rattles off her concerns, a shocking change from when she initially introduced herself. Shoyuta was concerned. He could tell the kid was most likely malnourished by how small he looked. While he shouldn't be so surprised that he had more internal injuries, considering he was taken hostage in a villain's hideout, it still upset him to see just how far the damage went. After the kid's health conditions were laid out like that, it didn't go so well on the way to the hospital. The kid freaked out when Akiyama went to put him on N4. Shoyuta tried to calm him as much as possible, but he wouldn't have it. Unfortunately, he pushed himself to exhaustion, and his body shut down on its own. It made it easier for one of the other present medics to use a sedative to put him to sleep, just so he could have somewhat of a break from the constant stress he had endured over the past few hours. Shoyuta had texted Hisashi as soon as he arrived at the hospital, letting him know he would be getting back late, and that he was fine. He knew his husband stayed up late, sometimes waiting for him to be done patrol, so he didn't want him to be worried when Shoyuta didn't come home at the promised time. Seeing the kid lying in a hospital bed was heartbreaking, to say the least. Despite what many people knew about Shoyuta and his intimidating, harsh nature, he had a soft spot for kids, especially those who came from horrible circumstances. He would never admit that, though, and only Hisashi really knew this about him. The kid was still passed out. The nurse administered N4 for nutrients, drew blood, and covered him in a couple of extra blankets to keep him warm. The nurse told Shoyuta that he would probably be out until the next morning, but Shoyuta wanted to stay for a little longer anyway. He didn't really know why, but it felt right. Shoyuta woke to a buzz in his pocket. It was still dark out, so Shoyuta wasn't asleep for long. He took his phone out, thinking it would be Hisashi, but the caller ID showed Detective Tsukachi at the top. He looked up to see the kid still asleep, so he quietly stepped out of the room to take the call. "Tsukachi, what is it?" he answered, knowing this had something to do with the Quirk trafficking case. "Hey, Eraser. We were looking at those notebooks you told the other officers to grab from the kid's cell. Do they reveal anything?" "Not really. We had a team look through them, but it seems like they're written in some type of code. None of us could make sense of anything written. Shoyuta huffed. Of course, it wouldn't be that easy. Do you think I could take a look? Sure. We have no more use for them anyway. Plus, you know we will have to question the kids soon. Shoyuta sighed, dragging a hand down his face. With how he reacted to the medics, he knew this would not end well. I understand, Sakachi, but you need to wait a little longer. There's no way he will be comfortable speaking to anyone right now. I know, and I promise I'm trying to postpone it as much as possible. But with how long this trafficking operation has been going on, and now having a possible witness after all these months, the chief is eager. Shoyuta's jaw clenched. Well, tell your chief that the witness is a child who had gone through who knows what down there. I'll get the notebooks later. Good night. Good night, Eraser. Sukachi sounded tired as he hung up the phone, and Shoyuta only kind of felt bad. He knew the detective was doing his best. With another sigh, Shoyuta made his way back into the room. The next few days were going to be long. Chapter 3. Izuku woke up and immediately squeezed his eyes shut because of the blinding lights shining above him. He slowly blinked his eyes open to adjust, and after a few seconds, he took in his surroundings. While his experimentation room looked similar, the white walls, bright lights, the distinct disinfectant smell, he knew he was someplace else simply because of the soft bed he was lying on. His memories were muddled, but he vaguely remembered being taken out of the place he had inhabited for the past few years. When he turned his head to the right, he jolted at the sight of another person. His heart rate spiked, but he forced himself to calm down. The figure, Eraserhead, if he remembered correctly, was currently slouched to the side, his head resting on his fist, and seemed to be asleep. Izuku didn't want to wake him, so he continued surveying his room. Izuku tilted his head to the left, where his heart monitor and 4-drip sat, and he could only wonder what they were supplementing him with. He still felt pain from last night, though it was not as prominent, and he didn't feel too groggy, so he was not being deliberately kept unconscious anymore. A small window on the wall brought in soft rays of sunlight, and he mentally calculated how long it would take to undo the latches on the window and slip through if needed. Izuku took a few deep breaths and forced himself to relax. He was not in any immediate danger, but it was nice to know where he was in case he needed to escape. Since Eraserhead saved him, Izuku didn't think he would do anything to hurt him, but trusting too easily was his fatal flaw. He tried sitting up in the bed, but his body immediately protested, and he couldn't help but let out a quiet whimper of pain. Izuku lowered himself back down and inhaled sharply through his teeth. The noise must have been enough to wake Eraserhead, because suddenly he was sitting up and leaning forward, eyes alert. "Hey kid, do you need help getting up?" he asked, his voice strangely calming. Yes, please," he muttered, not making direct eye contact. Eraserhead nodded and leaned towards the bed, pressing a button that made the top half of the hospital bed move upwards slowly. Izuku adjusted carefully on the way up, wincing when his scars ached painfully. "How are you feeling?" Eraserhead broke the silence, looking him over with calculating eyes. Izuku gripped the blanket in his fists tightly to stop his hands from shaking. "Hurts," he whispered. His heart was pounding in his chest as he waited for Eraserhead's response and what he would do with it. "Well, since you're awake now, I can call in a nurse to look you over. Does that sound okay?" Izuku immediately tensed, not liking the idea of that at all. His fingers twitched against the blanket, and his shoulders hunched forward a bit. Eraserhead, understanding Izuku's hesitance, placed a hand on the edge of the bed. Not touching, but there as a reassurance. "Just like last night, kid, I'll be right here. The staff is meant to help you feel better." It took a moment, but Izuku's grip loosened on the blanket, and he relaxed. It was true, Eraserhead was a steady presence for him last night, but he didn't trust other people's intentions. He was on edge, especially with how eerily similar the room he was in was to the experiment room. But with Eraserhead with him, maybe he could let it happen. "Okay," he mumbled, and that seemed to be all the confirmation needed because Eraserhead pressed the button next to the bed on the wall meant to call for a nurse's attention. After a few moments, a knock sounded at the door before it was pushed open. A voice called out, "Good morning," and Izuku lifted his head slightly to look at who walked in. A woman with sleek black hair pulled into a bun and light blue scrubs made her way over to them, a small, welcoming smile on her face. Izuku felt slightly at ease, but not enough to completely let his guard down. "Hi, sweetie, I'm Nurse Sato. How do you feel? Any aches or pains?" she asked him. Izuku paused, eyes flickering towards Eraserhead instinctively. The man nodded, and Izuku glanced back towards the nurse. "My arms and head hurt, and I feel sore," he said, and the nurse nodded before coming around to his left side. "Okay, hun, I'm going to look over your vitals and compare them to what the medic told us last night. Then I'll ask our technician to schedule an X-ray to look at the fractures she also mentioned. That is probably where a lot of your pain is stemming from," she explained. Izuku's brows furrowed, but he nodded, not sure what to say to all that. Sato gathered what she needed and began looking over his blood pressure, breathing, and temperature. Izuku was tense throughout each procedure, the heart monitor displaying his rapidly beating heart, but Eraserhead kept his hand on the edge of the bed, a silent yet comforting presence. Sato helped by being gentle and patient, making sure Izuku knew what was going on as it happened. By the end, Izuku was exhausted. He just woke up, yet all this nervous energy was draining him. Sato was speaking, but he was not paying attention, his gaze drifting toward the window. He felt bad since she seemed nice, but his pain wasn't going away and he wanted to sleep. Izuku flinched when he felt a hand on his shoulder, and he whipped his head around to see Eraserhead. He muttered a quick sorry and pulled his hand away. His eyes were filled with what seemed like concern, but Izuku wasn't sure why it was directed at him. Izuku didn't see the nurse in the room anymore, and he wondered just how long he had been staring at the window for. "The nurse is going to bring in some pain meds for your headache and soreness. Just stay awake a bit longer so you can take them, all right?" Izuku nodded, and he pulled the blankets a little bit higher on himself, feeling a little cold. He didn't have to wait long, as it only took a few seconds after Eraserhead told him that Sato came back with pain medication and a glass of water. Izuku quietly thanked her and swallowed the pill, downing it with the water. He took a few more sips before shakily handing it to Eraserhead, who placed it on the bedside table. Sato left, and Eraserhead told him to lie back as he pressed a button to make the top half of the hospital bed go back down so he could sleep. Izuku felt himself relax, and quicker than usual, he was asleep. His blood pressure is fine, and there's no issue with his lungs, but his body temperature is still a bit low. It's better than last night. The extra blankets seem to keep him warm, but there may be some underlying cause. Just make sure he's not showing any hypothermic symptoms such as prolonged shivering, pale skin, slurred speech, that kind of thing. Usually, Shoyuta would be annoyed that the nurse was talking to him about the kid's health when he was right there to be told directly, but he didn't seem to be paying attention anyway. The nurse told him she would be back with the pain meds, so Shoyuta turned his attention to the kid. His usual stoic expression fell away to worry as he examined him. The kid's body was trembling. In pain or fear, he couldn't tell, maybe both. A couple of minutes passed, and Shoyuta schooled his expression before placing a hand on the kid's shoulder. Just after he fell asleep, Shuta's phone started buzzing. This time, it was Hisashi calling. Shoyuta stepped out into the hallway, but kept the door slightly ajar so he could keep an eye on the kid. "Hey, Zashi, sorry I haven't come home yet." "Sho, I'm here. What floor are you on? I brought you some coffee and breakfast from home, since I know the hospital food can be gross, and I'm sure the coffee there is the same way. Seriously, you think they could invest in some better options?" Shoyuta was dumbfounded as Hisashi kept on rambling. "Here? What do you mean, here?" "At the hospital, of course. I know you must be tired because there's no way you got any sleep last night." Shoyuta huffed, fondness washing over him. "Yes, of course. I'm on the 3rd floor, but be quiet as you come up. The kid's asleep." "Alrighty," Hisashi chirped, and he ended the call. Shoyuta shook his head and sat on one of the chairs set up outside the room. It only took a couple of minutes before he heard the elevator ding, and it opened up to his husband, who immediately spotted him and made his way over. "Hey, Sho," he said quietly as promised, kissing him before handing him the coffee and breakfast. Hisashi sat next to him as Shoyuta opened the container he was given, slumping back into his seat a bit with a sigh. "How's the little listener?" Hisashi asked, an arm coming up to wrap loosely around Shuta's shoulders to rub his arm comfortingly. He's on edge and in a lot of pain. I think he underplayed just how much he's hurting. He has so many scars, Zashi. A child should never have that much. Shoyuta was worried. There were no leads so far on exactly who was running the Quirk trafficking in the bar, and the kid was the only victim found so far. He didn't get a chance to look through the other rooms when he was there. He was focused on getting the kid to safety. The officers Tsukachi sent were the ones to investigate, so Shoyuta would have to ask him about it when he went to retrieve the notebooks. Hisashi frowned, concerned for the kid's well-being. Do you think I could meet him? Shoyuta chewed his food thoughtfully, thinking it over before shrugging with one shoulder. Possibly. I would have to talk to him first. He seems to trust me, at least somewhat. I still don't even know the kid's name. Hisashi nodded, his expression brightening at the thought of meeting the child. I was thinking, if the kid is comfortable enough, I could look after him while you go home and refresh. And don't look at me like that. You've been out all night and morning. I know you're exhausted, more than usual, and you need to get out of your hero costume, he said, firm but not unkind. Shoyuta sighed. The end turned more into a groan. It wasn't often that Hisashi acted like this, so he knew it was serious. I know, but, like I said, he's jumpy. Not quick to trust even a pro hero. If it goes well, I'll think about it. Hisashi smiled widely, his stern expression melting away easily. I can't wait, he exclaimed, and Shoyuta had to glare at him to remind him to be quiet. Hopefully, this meeting wouldn't backfire and make the kid regress even further into himself. Chapter 4. Izuku woke with a gasp, shooting up into a seated position. He gripped the blankets tightly as his eyes darted around the room. For a few moments, he thought he was back there, but with his hands gripping the blankets, he slowly came back to himself. Izuku took deep breaths and shakily rubbed around his sternum to calm himself down. He wasn't with Sensei. He was safe. Well, safer, and Eraserhead was with him. He froze when he saw that Eraserhead's chair was empty. Panic washed over him again, and his breaths came out quickly. He could hear a dull beeping sound to his left, but he ignored it. Eraser? Razorhead, he called out tentatively, leaning to the side a bit as he tried to see around the curtain that hung at the end of his bed. Before Izuku could panic any further and try to get up to search for the hero himself, he could hear footsteps making their way towards him. Izuku tensed, chest heaving until Eraserhead came into view, looking a little disheveled. Kid? Hey, I'm right here. Eraserhead crouched beside his bed, one of his hands stretched out towards Izuku. Can I touch your hand? He asked softly, his expression softening. Izuku hesitated before nodding. Eraserhead gently grabbed his hand and brought it up to his chest, breathing in and out exaggeratedly. Here, copy my breathing, kid. Izuku's fingers tightened on Eraserhead's shirt as he tried his best to follow his instructions. After what seemed like hours, but was most likely only a few minutes, Izuku controlled his breathing and the incessant beeping noise he heard earlier stopped. Izuku looked up at Eraserhead, a little scared to see his reaction, but all he found there was concern and patience. Feeling better? Izuku nodded, and Eraserhead was about to let go of his hand. Breath hitching, Izuku tightened his grip on Eraserhead's hand. It was warm and comforting. He didn't want to let go. Eraserhead's eyebrows rose in what looked like surprise, and Izuku was about to take his hand back, but the heroes simply adjusted their hands so his grip was firm in Izuku's. Izuku flushed and looked down at his lap. Eraserhead pulled his chair forward so he could sit closer to his bed and still have a comfortable hold on Izuku's hand. It was quiet. He could only hear the bustling of nurses and doctors walking in the hallways, but it was nice to just sit here in comfortable silence and not feel pressured to do or perform anything for others. Absent-mindedly, Izuku was running his thumb across the back of Eraserhead's hand, and it was helping him relax. He was lost in his thoughts. Thankfully, nothing too negative, which was a change. Is the pain medication working? Eraserhead's soft voice broke the silence, but it wasn't unwelcome. Izuku took a second to take stock of how he felt, not noticing any sharp pains or outstanding aches in his body, even with his abrupt awakening. Yes, I think so. I don't feel like I did last night, he said, turning his head to face Eraserhead. The hero nodded, and he looked like he wanted to ask something else, but held himself back. Izuku waited. Eraserhead looked nervous. It was a little concerning to Izuku because up until, well, now, the hero always looked sure of himself and like he knew what to do. After a few more seconds of deliberation, Eraserhead finally looked at him and opened his mouth to speak. My partner is here, right outside the room. He came because he wanted to meet you. I told him I would ask you first, of course, if you were up to it. You can say no. I know you've had a rough few hours. He's harmless, if only a little loud. But I'll be here to help if he gets too excited. Eraserhead was rambling. This was the most he's heard the hero speak so far, and his eyes had softened considerably at the mention of this so-called partner. Even to Izuku, it was clear he cared about this person a lot. At this point, Izuku didn't think Eraserhead would bring anyone inside that would hurt him. It was a little scary how quickly he was trusting Eraserhead. That usually never ended well for him. But this was different. Throughout the whole time he's been around the hero, he's only made him feel safe. Izuku squeezed Eraserhead's hand to cut him off, and he almost laughed at the expression the hero made. This decision really seemed to make Eraserhead nervous. Okay, I'll meet him, Izuku said, and Eraserhead looked relieved. The hero nodded and squeezed Izuku's hand before letting go. He's just outside, so I'll be right back, he assured, standing up. Logically, Izuku knew he had to go get the person, but it didn't stop his body from tensing up when the hero walked out of the room. Izuku gripped the blankets in his lap and took deep breaths. Seconds passed before Izuku could vaguely hear excited whispers, and when Izuku glanced up, Eraserhead came in with his partner. The man was only a couple of centimeters taller than Eraserhead, but his hair made him look taller. He wore it in a ponytail, the long, blonde locks falling haphazardly around his shoulders. He had blue headphones around his neck that sat on top of a plain shirt covered by a leather jacket. Glasses sat atop his nose, covering green, swirling eyes. Izuku's eyebrows furrowed. He looked familiar, which was weird. He was sure he'd never come into contact with this person before. It wasn't until the person spoke that he knew who this man was. "Hey, little listener," he exclaimed. Not too loudly, but Izuku could tell he was physically holding himself back from activating his quirk. If that didn't give it away, Izuku wasn't sure what else would. Present Mike? Izuku gasped, eyes sparkling. Nothing else mattered. There were two pro heroes in his room, one of them being high on his list of favorite pros. Izuku itched for his hero analysis notebooks, wanting to ask so many questions. Both of the heroes looked shocked. Present Mike let out a delighted laugh, and he turned to face Eraserhead. "You didn't tell me the listener was a genius. And I thought I was in such good disguise." He was pouting, and Izuku couldn't really tell if the hero was joking or not. Regardless, Izuku felt bad for just outing his hero name like that for anyone to hear. "I am sorry," Izuku muttered, going back to gripping the blankets nervously. Present Mike turned back to him, and his expression softened, his voice coming out more subdued. "Don't apologize. If anything, I'm impressed, kiddo. Sometimes my coworkers don't even recognize me out in the wild. Are you a fan?" Here, before Izuku could blink, the hero was suddenly in front of him, handing something out in his palm. Izuku leaned forward, hesitantly grabbing what looked like a mini Present Mike keychain. Eraserhead gave Present Mike a flat stare. "You brought your own hero merch with you?" "I couldn't come empty-handed. I had to give the little listener a gift." "What if he didn't even like you?" Present Mike sputtered. Well, I would get something else, of course." Izuku huffed in amusement, bringing the keychain to his chest. "I love it. Thank you, Present Mike, sir." Present Mike turned his attention back on him with a kind smile. "Oh, none of that. Call me Hizashi, or Yamada, if you prefer," he said, and Izuku felt shocked. He felt a little uncomfortable with calling a pro hero by their name, but if Yamada insisted, he would do it. "Okay, Yamada," he said sheepishly. The hero grinned and sat down in Eraserhead's seat. Said hero scoffed. "That was my chair," he grumbled, but Yamada just waved away his concern. "There's more in the hallway." Eraserhead grumbled some more under his breath, but after a quick glance at Izuku, he went to go grab one. Unlike last time, Izuku felt more at ease when Eraserhead walked out, knowing he would come back. Plus, it was easy to relax in Yamada's presence. He was like walking sunshine. Eraserhead came back inside, chair in tow, and he set it beside Yamada before lowering himself onto it. There was a bit of an awkward silence, but nothing too uncomfortable. Yamada and Eraserhead shared a look, seeming to silently communicate something before they both turned back to face Izuku. "So, little listener, what's your name?" Yamada asked. Izuku's eyes widened a little, just now realizing he never told Eraserhead his name. Izuku he flinched slightly at his family name. He didn't have great memories associated with that name, and he didn't really want the two people he felt safe with to use it. "Izuku," he said, firm, and he glanced up to see their reactions. They both looked concerned, Yamada more so than Eraserhead, but Yamada smiled reassuringly. "Well, nice to meet you, Izuku." Izuku couldn't help but let out a small smile. Yamada's energy was just too infectious. Yamada reacted instantly, expression lighting up. "You are just so precious." His quirk slipped through a bit on that one, but luckily, Eraserhead seemed to anticipate it. He erased it just before his voice got any louder, and Izuku couldn't help but watch him use his quirk in awe. However, Yamada didn't even falter, leaning forward to continue the conversation with Izuku. Izuku wasn't paying attention, but if he was, he would have seen the warm and fond expression Eraserhead was wearing as he watched them. Chapter 5. The meeting was going well. At least, Shoyuta thought so. The kid, Izuku, wasn't trembling anymore, and he seemed a lot more relaxed than he did this morning. Even when the nurse came in to check on Izuku, he only tensed up once before Hisashi distracted him with more anecdotes from his villain fights. The kid had some very insightful questions. Honestly, Shoyuta couldn't follow a lot of Izuku's mutterings. He was exhausted, but Hisashi seemed to be handling it well. The coffee helped, however, he definitely needed more. Shoyuta was slumping forward, and he felt Hisashi elbow him in the ribs. Shoyuta grunted and shot the man a glare. Hisashi was giving him a knowing look. Shoyuta sighed and straightened up in his chair, focusing on Izuku. The kid was looking between them with concern, likely confused as to why there was a sudden stop in the conversation and why Shoyuta looked dead on his feet. He quickly checked his phone, noting it was already late morning. He would have to catch Tsukachi soon before the man was off duty. "Hey, Izuku, I need to run a few errands. It shouldn't take too long, a couple of hours at most. I promise I'll come back as soon as I can. And, while I'm gone, Hisashi will stay here so you won't be alone." How does that sound? Shoyuta was a bit nervous. Being comfortable around Hisashi was one thing, but alone? It might be too much. He could tell Izuku was also a little nervous about the idea. His hands were fiddling with the blankets, and his breathing was getting a little abnormal. Before Shoyuta could say anything, Hisashi placed a hand on his arm. Hisashi just shook his head, and Shoyuta sighed softly, nodding and waiting for Izuku's response. Izuku looked towards Hisashi and then Shoyuta, seeming to have his answer. "I'm okay with that. Just come back soon." He whispered the last part, but Shoyuta heard. Hisashi did too, if his ecstatic expression was anything to go by. Shuta's heart grew 3 times bigger, and he leaned forward to squeeze Izuku's hand. "I will, kid. Keep an eye on Zashi for me, okay?" He winked, and Izuku stifled a small giggle. Hisashi feigned outrage, gasping dramatically. "How dare you?" Shoyuta rolled his eyes and pressed a kiss to Hisashi's forehead before walking towards the door. "I'll see you two later," he said with a wave. Hisashi blew him a kiss, and Izuku waved back. While desperately wanting to get home and clean off, he needed to see Tsukachi. The man texted him just as he left the hospital that they had some information on Izuku. Shoyuta got to the station as quickly as possible, immediately seeking Tsukachi out in his office. He knocked before pushing the door open. Tsukachi was slouched over some papers, elbow propped up on his desk with his hand rubbing his temple, likely trying to fight a headache. When Shoyuta entered, the detective looked up, and he swore his eye bags could rival Shuta's. "Hey, Eraser, come see this." Shoyuta didn't hesitate. He made his way over to Tsukachi's side, eyes roaming over the file he had laid out. "What am I looking at?" It's a file on the kid, dated 2 months ago. This was the only thing on him that was left in one of the rooms. The officer said it looked like a lab. The contents are disturbing, to say the least, he said, handing the file over to Shoyuta. Shoyuta inhaled deeply before taking the file. The first thing he noticed was the picture of a younger Izuku in the top left corner, and underneath it was some writing. Basic information, such as his name, Izuku Midoriya, which is what Izuku had been about to say earlier, he now knew. His age, which made him do a double take. 8 years old. Shoyuta gritted out, eyes wide. He knew the kid was young, but holy shit. That's not even the worst part, Tsukachi tacked on, rather grim. Shoyuta braced himself as he read the file, his grip on the papers tightening with each sentence. It was an overview of the kid's progress, but the last few lines made him freeze. Subject is finally showing symptoms of quirk manifestation. After 2 years of trial and error, a second quirk is presenting itself. An aerokinetic one, as the subject was able to manipulate some of the air currents in the room, but weakly. We need to capitalize on this and make sure the quirk doesn't fall dormant. More results to come. Second quirk. Shoyuta growled, his free hand gripping the desk. He flipped through the other pages and wished he hadn't. Full accounts of what Izuku experienced in the last few months to get his quirk to manifest were written on these pages. Medical torture, drugging, suffocation, sensory deprivation, electrocution. There were also recorded instances of training that some person named Sensei oversaw. Taking a deep breath, Shoyuta flipped back to the first page. Is there any record of his first quirk? Tsukachi shook his head. No, but I did some digging after I saw the kid's name, he said, handing Shoyuta a separate file. He set the one he had down and took the new one. He opened it, and his eyebrows rose in surprise when he saw the picture of a man staring back at him. It was the black, curly-haired villain he encountered in the bar's basement. He checked the name, Hisashi Midoriya. Every new piece of information was just a slap in the face. He flipped through the other papers in the file, landing on a picture of a kind-faced woman with green hair and a chubby face. Name, Inko Midoriya. The part of her file that stood out was the bolded deceased underneath her picture. The last page, as he expected, was the kid. It was the same picture used in his previous file. On this page, the thing that stood out to him was what was listed underneath the quirk status. Quirk, quirkless. The implications of that filled Shuta's veins like ice. I asked around. For years ago, there was a 119 call regarding the Midoriya household. Apparently, their house went up in flames, leaving behind one body, Inko's. The fire was suspected to have been started by a quirk, but with Hisashi gone with no trace, it was hard to tell for sure. Izuku was also never found. Until now. Shoyuta let out a shaky breath, hands sliding down his face. He didn't even know what to think, what to say. This was a lot. A lot more than he thought he would get today. And this was only one file. Tsukachi let him stew in silence for a few moments. There was a sound of shuffling papers before Tsukachi set down a stack of notebooks in front of him. Shoyuta set the files aside and opened the first one atop the pile, eyebrows furrowed as he tried to make sense of what was in front of him. He can see now why Tsukachi's officers had problems with these notebooks. The writing didn't make any sense. There were numbers, letters, and symbols, all scrambled together. Tsukachi was right. It was like a code. One he had no way of cracking with how exhausted he was. He would need full brain power to figure this one out. They're all like this? Shoyuta asked. Yup, and they're yours to figure out. Shoyuta wondered if it would be a good idea to just give the notebooks back to Izuku. He wasn't sure. He didn't want to accidentally trigger any painful memories as he had no idea what these notebooks entailed. He would at least try his hand at it before asking the kid if he wanted them back. And, well, if he couldn't figure it out, he knew someone who probably could. Okay, if you find any other leads on this case, let me know. Tsukachi nodded and said goodbye as Shoyuta left to go home. Izuku was nervous at first about being alone with Yamada. While Yamada was super nice and bubbly, Izuku didn't know how to navigate conversation. He didn't have a lot of people to talk to back in the base, so having the room be filled with Yamada's chatter was different. Not bad, exactly, but different. Yamada also encouraged Izuku's questions. Anytime he had the urge to ask Yamada a question about his quirk, Yamada would gently coax him. The man had a sixth sense for this, and it really threw Izuku for a loop. Luckily, Yamada filled in the gaps Izuku left in their discussions. He never got upset or irritated by his lack of response to anything. It was nice. Sometimes it was hard to get words out. Hey, listener. Yamada spoke up after another lull in their conversation. Izuku hummed, showing that he was paying attention. Do you know sign language? Izuku frowned and shook his head. Yamada brightened at the opportunity to teach him something new. It's a way to communicate non-verbally with your hands. Many heroes, especially underground ones, will utilize it as it can be essential to be stealthy on certain missions. Want to see? Izuku nodded and inched forward on the bed to clearly see what Yamada was doing. I'll start with a simple one. Watch. Hello, my name is Hizashi. He spoke and made gestures with his hands as he did. Izuku watched in awe. Yamada smiled and brought his chair closer. Do you want to learn? Izuku nodded his head rapidly and only stopped when he started to feel dizzy. Yamada chuckled, and they spent the next hour or so learning different signs. Izuku could now spell out his name in JSL. After a while, Izuku was starting to get tired again. He was leaning more heavily against his pillows, and his eyes were drooping a bit. But he didn't want to sleep. He knew he wasn't alone, but his nightmares would corrupt his dreams whether he knew he was safe or not. Yamada had his arms resting on the edge of Izuku's bed, and he was about to speak when something else seemed to catch his eye. Before Izuku could question it, Yamada hovered a hand over Izuku's left wrist, where his suppressor cuff sat. What's this, little listener? Yamada asked lightly, but not touching his arm. Izuku tensed and fiddled with it. He mumbled, his nerves coming back tenfold. He couldn't meet Yamada's eyes. It's a Quirk suppressor. Yamada's eyes widened comically. Listener, why didn't you say anything? Is it causing any discomfort? Do you know how to take it off? Izuku honestly forgot about it. He had worn it so many times that he got used to the weird sensation of his quirks being subdued. He was somewhat grateful for it since he didn't know how to quite control them on his own yet. Izuku just shrugged. No, I don't feel anything, to be honest. And I don't know. Sensei always took them off, he said, risking a glance up at Yamada. The man looked sad and concerned. He wasn't sure why, since he had just told him that he wasn't feeling any discomfort. Okay, kiddo. I'll get someone to look at it, all right. Izuku trembled and shook his head. No, please, don't, he cried, gripping the blankets tight. Yamada frowned and raised his hands in a comforting gesture. Hey, no need to be worried. What's got you so worked up, HM? Yamada asked in a soothing tone. Izuku brought the blankets up to his shoulders, suddenly feeling cold. I don't want to hurt you. I don't know how to control them, he whispered, voice shaky. Yamada's brows furrowed. Them? What do you mean? My quirks. Yamada just looked even more confused and concerned. Quirks? As in plural? Yamada asked, his tone still gentle. Izuku froze and squeezed his eyes shut, curling into a ball. He was in trouble, wasn't he? He could feel tears streaming down his face as his whole body shook in fear. Izuku could vaguely hear Yamada speaking, but he couldn't make it out over the sound of his heavy breathing. He felt something touch his hand, and he flinched, but the touch didn't relent. Izuku became a little more aware of the feeling of someone's heartbeat under his hand and the rise and fall of their chest. Subconsciously, he tried to follow it, his breath hitching a few times throughout. After a little while, he got control of his breathing again, and he could hear the soft voice of Yamada talking. Izuku slowly opened his eyes, blinking his tears away, and the room came into focus. He wasn't in the lab, he was here with Yamada. When they made eye contact, Yamada gave him a soft smile and trailed off from whatever story he was telling. Hey, sweetheart, are you back with me? Izuku nodded and shifted slightly on the bed. He didn't take his hand away from Yamada's much like he did with Eraserhead. Yamada's hands were soft, while Eraser's were rough and calloused, but both were warm. I'm sorry, Izuku whispered, and Yamada immediately shook his head. Don't apologize. I'm sorry for bringing up a sensitive topic. We don't have to worry about that now, okay? Izuku's lips wobbled. Yamada was just so kind. He and Eraserhead both were. Izuku didn't know how to deal with it. Izuku couldn't help but yawn, still exhausted. The panic attack didn't help, either. His grip didn't loosen in Yamada's hold, but he was fighting his drooping eyes. Yamada chuckled softly and squeezed his hand. Sleep, listener. I'll be right here when you wake up. Izuku huffed, mumbling I'm not tired, but it came out pretty unintelligible as he slowly let sleep overcome him. Chapter 6. After a hot shower, a change of clothes into something comfortable, and more coffee, Shoyuta felt like a new man. He was still tired, but he'd survive. He'd done a lot more on a lot less sleep. Shoyuta was sitting on the couch while he sipped his coffee, mind wandering towards what he learned today with Tsukauchi. He was so angry. How could anyone do this to a kid? If Izuku disappeared at 4 years old, and he was just now being found, that potentially meant he was in there for 4 years. He didn't put it past Hisashi to put the kid in that situation, considering he was a villain himself. Before Shoyuta could spiral any further, he felt one of the cats jump up onto his lap. Shoyuta placed a hand on Bastard, petting him as he purred. He was a calico. When Hisashi and he found Bastard, he was feral and prone to hissing any time they got close. It took a long time, but Bastard eventually warmed up to Shoyuta. He was still iffy on Hisashi, but Bastard would occasionally let the man pick him up and pet him. Hisashi said it was because of how alike they were, but Shoyuta didn't see the connection. The other one, Sushi, was a brown, fluffy cat and very affectionate. Pretty much the opposite of Bastard. She was probably napping in their room, so she wouldn't make an appearance unless Shoyuta went to bother her. He sat there for a while, recuperating and finishing his coffee. When he was done, he stood and made his way to the kitchen. Shoyuta figured he should make some food for himself, Hisashi, and the kid. He would make a smaller portion for Izuku, though, because he knew recovering from malnourishment was a slow process. Shoyuta made a late lunch, packed it into 3 bentos, and placed them in a plastic bag to carry. He filled the cat's food and water bowls and made his way to the door. Before he left, though, he had an idea. Shoyuta put the food down and went into Hisashi's and his room, grabbing an old black sweatshirt. It was small on him, but it would be big on Izuku and hopefully offer some comfort and warmth. He gave Sushi a few pets because, of course, he couldn't resist. Then he was on his way back to the hospital. Shoyuta texted Hisashi that he was on his way up, and he got a thumbs-up emoji in response. Shoyuta frowned. Usually, Hisashi used at least 5 emojis every text message, so he hoped nothing was wrong. When the elevator opened, he went to the kid's room, quietly opening the door in case he was asleep. Shoyuta was right, so he kept quiet when he made his way over to Hisashi. He sat in his chair, setting the plastic bag beside him and the sweater on the back of the chair. Hisashi held Izuku's hand as he slept, focusing only on him. "Zashi," Shoyuta whispered, placing a hand on his shoulder. Hisashi turned to him with glossy eyes. Shuta's eyes widened, and he brought his other hand to cradle Hisashi's face. "What's wrong?" "The kid Sho," he sighed, shaking his head. "He still has a Quirk suppressor cuff on him. When I asked about it, he didn't seem bothered, but he trailed off." Shoyuta waited patiently, and Hisashi continued after a moment. "When I suggested taking it off, he freaked out. Told me he didn't want to hurt me with them. I was confused, so I asked, what is them? His quirks are what he meant. Quirks. Plural. He has at least more than one. That is extremely rare, Sho." And he started crying, and I never want to see him cry, ever. It was heartbreaking. Shoyuta wiped a couple of stray tears from Hisashi's eyes as he spoke. So, at least some of what Shoyuta would tell Hisashi he learned wouldn't be new. "Yeah, I spoke to Tsukauchi before going home. He showed me a file recovered from the bar. It was bad, Zashi. So bad." He sighed before standing. "Come out here," he said and grabbed Hisashi's free hand. Hisashi frowned. "Why?" He hesitantly pulled his hand from Izuku's, making sure he didn't wake up before following Shoyuta outside the room. He stood just outside the room, so he could see when Izuku woke up. "Because if the kid wakes up and hears what I know, it could trigger his memories," he said and ran a hand through his hair. "The file I read said that Izuku was developing a second quirk 2 months ago, through horrible methods." Shoyuta shuddered just thinking about it. Hisashi rubbed his arm in support. "If that wasn't bad, I also found out that the kid was diagnosed as quirkless when he was 4. His father, Hisashi Midoriya, burned their house down presumably with his quirk, killing Izuku's mother and fleeing with the kid. I am assuming he brought them right to the villains, because Hisashi was there the night I found Izuku. I fought him, and I erased his quirk before he could use it, but it looked like he could breathe fire. This implies that Izuku was there for 4 years. Shoyuta didn't sugarcoat it. He honestly didn't think he could, but he knew Hisashi would rather have him relay the information as it is. He kept an eye on Izuku the entire time he spoke, afraid that if he saw Hisashi's reactions, he would falter and wouldn't be able to tell him what he knew. Glancing at him now, Shoyuta wasn't surprised to see a mix of anguish, shock, and fury coating Hisashi's expression. So he's only 8 years old, Hisashi whispered, voice breaking. Shoyuta could only nod. He's a baby Sho. I mean, I knew he was because look at how small he is. But, knowing for sure, and knowing how long he was in there, enduring what he did, Hisashi shook his head, more tears coming to his eyes. Shoyuta knew how Hisashi felt because he felt the same way, as well as anger towards the people who did this to Izuku. He pulled Hisashi in for a hug, holding him tightly. We will find them and make them pay, Shoyuta whispered into Hisashi's ear. Hisashi nodded against his shoulder. After a few moments, Shoyuta pulled away. But for now, let's just keep the kid company. I brought food for all of us, he said and tugged Hisashi back into the room. Ah, Sho, you cooked for us? Hisashi perked up, eyes sparkling. Shoyuta scoffed. Don't act like I never cook, he grumbled and handed Hisashi the bag. Hisashi just grinned and kissed Shuta's cheek before opening his bento and eating. How were the cats? Hisashi whispered, taking another bite. Fine. Bastard said hello, and Sushi was lounging on our bed. Typical, he muttered, and Hisashi chuckled. Well, at least they're surviving without us. I'm guessing the little listener is going to stay overnight. Shoyuta nodded. Yeah. The nurse told us she would need to monitor his body temperature and make an appointment with a technician for an X-ray. I brought this for him, he said and grabbed the sweater from the back of his chair. Hisashi stifled a squeal and ignored Shuta's glare. He's gonna look adorable. Shoyuta couldn't help but smile. He agreed with that for sure. The two sat in silence for a bit, the only noise being Hisashi eating. Shoyuta leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes, not quite napping but resting before Izuku woke up. However longer later, Shoyuta opened his eyes to the sounds of footsteps entering the room. He sat up, turning to see Nurse Sato. She smiled, and instead of checking on Izuku like usual, she stopped in front of Hisashi and him. Hey guys. So, I scheduled an appointment to examine Izuku's fractures and breaks for tomorrow afternoon. The doctor will be able to analyze the results and tell us our next steps. Most likely, if his fractures hadn't healed correctly, he would need longer-term care. Will you two be the ones to overlook this? Because if not, we will need to submit a treatment plan to a guardian. Yes, we will take care of him, Hisashi cut in, and Shoyuta looked at him in surprise. Not that Shoyuta was opposed to the idea, but they hadn't been able to discuss potential guardianship at all. Sato nodded and made some notes on her clipboard. Perfect. I'll check in on him later in the evening to see if he needs anything else, she said and left the room. Shoyuta and Hisashi turned to face each other. Come on, Sho. You can't tell me you were thinking of just letting some strangers take him in. No, of course not. I'm just surprised. I know you've been wanting a kid, Zashi, but are you thinking this through? We have 5 jobs between us, so money's not a problem, but we would need at least one of us to be home. And what if the kid is allergic to cats? And Hisashi cut him off, grabbing his hand. Sho, relax. We will find a way, you know that. With your patrol hours in mind, at least one of us would be home for the night and morning. You expelled all your students this year, so you'll have time during the day to look after him. Maybe you could even bring the little listener with you to UA? And if he's allergic to cats, we'll figure that out, too. Plus, you literally have the perfect quirk to counter Izuku's if it gets out of control. Shoyuta sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Okay, you're right. Of course I am. Hisashi smiled and kissed the back of Shuta's hand. The kid is comfortable with us. Well, with you. I think I'm getting there. Oh, did I tell you I taught him some sign language? Shoyuta smiled fondly and shook his head, listening intently to Hisashi telling him about his and Izuku's time together while he was gone. The sun was setting by the time Izuku woke up next. Surprisingly, he didn't have any nightmares, but his arms were starting to hurt again. He whimpered as he shifted, blinking his eyes open to see Yamada and Eraserhead sitting together next to his bed. Razor, Izuku mumbled, vision focusing. Hey kid, are you feeling any pain? Eraserhead asked, looking concerned. Izuku nodded. The nurse should be here any minute, and I'll let her know you need some more pain medication, okay? Okay, Izuku said and shifted his gaze towards Yamada. The man smiled. Hey baby, how'd you sleep? I slept really good. Izuku smiled, and Yamada's smile widened in response. That's great. Hey, after you take your medicine, you should show you to hear what you learned earlier. Izuku looked confusedly at Eraserhead. Shota, he mumbled, tilting his head. Hisashi gasped. Sho, don't tell me you never told the listener your name, he said, quite dramatically in Izuku's opinion. Eraserhead grimaced. Ah, sorry kid. I honestly forgot. It's Shoyuto Aizawa. Whatever you're comfortable calling me, go ahead. Izuku nodded, mentally getting used to his name. The hero had just been Eraserhead to him this whole time, so he'd have to get used to it. First name basis with two heroes. Izuku couldn't believe it. Well, he knew their first names, and he wasn't quite ready to use them yet, but still, he was so happy about it. Also, I brought this for you to keep warm, Aizawa said and reached behind him, grabbing what looked like a black sweater. Izuku's eyes widened when he took it, feeling the soft material underneath his fingertips. Wow, thank you. Are you sure I can wear this? Izuku looked back at Aizawa, who nodded. Of course, kid. It's too small for me anyway. Do you need help putting it on? Izuku blushed, but he nodded. His arms hurt too much to raise them. Aizawa stood up and helped Izuku put the sweater on, being gentle and patient the whole way. When it was fully on, Izuku basked in its warmth. The sleeves went way past his hands, and the sweater bunched at his waist. If he were standing, it would probably go to his knees. Yamada cooed. Adorable, he shouted, making Izuku giggle, and Aizawa just sighed. The nurse came in eventually and gave Izuku another pill for the night. Time passed, mostly spent by Izuku showing Aizawa the signs he learned with Yamada, and both of them teaching him new ones. He even used some of them during conversation, earning praise from the two heroes. Izuku didn't know what emotion he was feeling right now, but happy couldn't exactly describe it. Two pro heroes here, spending time with Izuku, complimenting him too. It was a lot more than Izuku thought he deserved. He was so used to minimal words and orders, and when Izuku did anything, there was someone always criticizing and punishing him. He didn't understand it. Night was approaching, and Izuku was feeling anxious. The heroes probably didn't want to spend the night with him, too. That would be too much, right? He just didn't think he would get any sleep when alone. While Izuku was used to sleeping alone at the base, it took him weeks, maybe even months, to get used to it. He was in a new environment. The two seemed to pick up on his mood. Hey, listener, tell us what's on your mind. Are you still in pain? Yamada asked, reaching a hand out to hold Izuku's. Izuku's hand twitched in Yamada's hold, and he hesitated. He shouldn't bother them any more than he has. The heroes needed sleep. Aizawa still looked exhausted. Izuku just shook his head. And nothing's wrong. I'm just, thinking about tomorrow and what you guys will be up to. Izuku didn't think his subtlety worked, since the heroes shared a knowing glance. One of us will stay here tonight, kid. You won't be alone, Aizawa reassured him. Izuku felt relieved, but he didn't show it on his face just yet. Are you allowed to? And it's really okay. You guys don't have to do that. I'll be fine. Izuku tried to argue, but his voice faltered near the end. He really didn't want them to leave. Promise, kid. It's allowed. Typically, in a pediatric unit, one of us is allowed to stay overnight to make sure you're all right. And we want to do it, Aizawa explained. Izuku let out a breath, nodding. It did make him feel better, but he couldn't help that small sense of guilt in the back of his mind. Okay, thank you, he muttered, and Yamada squeezed his hand. Before it got too late, the heroes decided that Yamada would stay over. They bickered about it, but Yamada made some good points. Yamada reminded Aizawa that he still technically didn't get a full night's rest, and he had to be ready for his patrol later on. Aizawa argued that he could skip patrol, but after a stern glare from Yamada, that was shut down pretty quickly. Remind Izuku to never get on Yamada's bad side. It took a while, but Aizawa relented and got ready to leave. He stood in front of Izuku, reaching a hand down to ruffle Izuku's curls. He flinched a little from the unexpected touch, but he quickly leaned into it once he realized it wasn't a harmful one. I'll see you tomorrow, okay, Izuku? Sleep well, Aizawa said. Izuku nodded and mumbled a good night as Aizawa leaned down to kiss Yamada. The affection between the two of them looked so easy and heartfelt. Good night, Sho. Text me when you get home. He could hear Yamada whisper. Finally, after Aizawa said his goodbyes again, he left for the second time that day, leaving Yamada and Izuku to keep each other company for the night. Chapter 7. The night went smoothly. Nurse Sato brought in a cot, pillows, and blankets for Yamada, placing them all right next to his bed. Izuku felt a lot better having Yamada close. It was already late when Aizawa left, so they didn't do much. Yamada would speak a little bit about his days as a hero, but he could tell Yamada was getting tired. After a while, Yamada said goodnight, and Izuku did as well. He watched as Yamada got comfortable and went to sleep, jealous of how easy it was for him. Izuku slept so much today that his sleep schedule was a little messed up, so he stayed awake a bit longer. Izuku was thinking about the past 24 hours. It still seemed surreal that he was out of the base. He kept thinking it was some cruel hallucination, but he knew it wasn't. Not when he could feel Yamada and Aizawa's kindness, their gentle touches, their patient words. They actually wanted to stay around him. He wondered how long that would last. Izuku spent the next couple of hours in his head before he truly felt exhaustion wash over him. With one last glance at Yamada, Izuku let his eyes flutter closed, and he fell into a restless sleep. Midoriya, a gruff voice snapped, waking Izuku. He jolted, feeling cool metal on his back and exposed skin. His arms and legs were restrained, and all he could feel was pain. Izuku panicked. No, no, no. He couldn't be back here. His breath hitched, and he looked up to see the doctor hovering over him, scalpel in hand. Looks like I'll have to be harsher if you're drifting off in the middle of this, he said, and his voice sounded warped. Izuku struggled against the restraints, crying. He couldn't yell for help. His throat closed up. The doctor said, I thought you grew out of this. You know you can't escape these. It'll go faster if you stay still. The doctor walked around to the side of Izuku, a manic grin on his face. Ready? Izuku kept thrashing despite the doctor's words, crying and screaming now as the doctor dragged the scalpel aggressively down his left arm. It left jagged lines of blood in its path, and the doctor just went around to his other side to do the same on his right arm. Wake up! The doctor suddenly spoke, but his voice was off. It sounded weird. Wake up, Izuku. Izuku. Izuku gasped and wrenched himself up as he woke, and immediately he started crying. He grabbed his left arm, looking down at it, expecting blood. Instead, black cloth met him, and he frantically pushed up the sleeve. Hey, sweetheart, look at me, he heard someone say to his right, and he whipped his head around. Yamada was sitting on the edge of his bed, both hands palm out in front of him. Izuku's brows furrowed, and he looked back at his left arm, immediately disobeying Yamada. There was no blood, just old scars. Izuku pushed the sleeve back down and breathed heavily, instead grasping the sweater at his sternum. He could still feel the sharp tool on his skin, the blood dripping down his arm. Izuku, hey, Yamada said, and Izuku jumped. He forgot he was there. Izuku looked back at Yamada, his body shaking and tears still falling. Yamada tried to smile reassuringly, but Izuku could see the deep worry etched on his face. There you are. Take deep breaths for me, he said, breathing in and out exaggeratedly himself to guide Izuku. Izuku copied him, and eventually, his breathing was back to normal. The phantom pain dulled, still there, but almost completely gone. Izuku reached his right hand out hesitantly, his arm shaking. Yamada met him halfway, gripping Izuku's hand and intertwining their fingers. Is this real? Izuku whispered, and Yamada let out a pained sound. Yes, baby, this is real. You're here. You were rescued out of that place, I promise, he said, bringing their hands up to rest over Yamada's heart. Izuku nodded, his heart rate finally back to normal. Okay, I believe you, Izuku whispered, and Yamada's smile was genuine. Good, good. They sat in silence for a moment before Yamada spoke up again. Sho will be here soon. Are you hungry? He's bringing food for us. Izuku nodded. He actually was hungry. He ate a bit of the food that Aizawa brought last night, and it was wonderful. He was excited to try more. Yamada's eyes lit up. Great. Izuku could tell that Yamada wanted to ask what he was dreaming about. Izuku thought about it for a minute and decided that talking about it might be easier. I was back there, in the lab. My arms and legs were strapped down, and Izuku's breath hitched, but Yamada didn't interrupt him. He just kept hold of his hand. The man who performed the experiments on me. He called himself T the Doctor. He was in my dream. I was so scared. Izuku ended his sentence in a whisper, the tears gathering in his eyes again. Yamada leaned forward and used his free hand to cup his cheek. You're safe, listener. Shoyuta, and I will protect you. They won't come near you again, Yamada promised, wiping Izuku's tears away with his thumb. Izuku sniffed and nodded, leaning into Yamada's touch. They stayed like that for a while. Eventually, Aizawa came through the door with 2 bags in one hand. Yamada turned his head and smiled. Hey, Sho. Just in time. Izuku and I are starving. He dragged the word out, making Izuku laugh. Aizawa huffed and gave Yamada a separate bag before placing the food down next to Izuku. Here's a change of clothes for you. I also brought a spare toothbrush and toothpaste so you don't have to go all the way home, Aizawa said. Yamada sprang up and kissed Aizawa's cheek. Thanks, babe. I'll be right back. He went into the bathroom, leaving Izuku and Aizawa alone. Aizawa took Yamada's place on the edge of the bed, offering Izuku a minuscule smile. Morning, kid. Did you sleep okay? Was Hisashi snoring? He said the last part conspiratorially, making Izuku smile. No, he was fine. I slept okay, but I woke up from a nightmare. Izuku mumbled, smile faltering. Aizawa placed a hand on Izuku's head, running his fingers gently through his hair. Izuku hummed and leaned into it. I'm sorry. Are you feeling better now? Izuku nodded, eyes slipping closed as he relaxed to the sensation of Aizawa playing with his hair. Why Yamada helped me calm down. It was about the lab. I was back there, and it scared me. I thought maybe I wasn't really out of there. Aizawa took it in, sitting in silence for a couple of minutes and playing with Izuku's hair to calm him down. I have nightmares too, every so often, Aizawa whispered, and Izuku looked up at him. Oh, really? Aizawa nodded. Yup. At times, they feel so real that it's hard to discern what's real and what's not. But I came up with a system. It can take a few tries as it's hard to focus in a nightmare, and a lot of times we can't control what we see. What I do is think of anything that seemed off about the nightmare. It could be a person who's not supposed to be there, or sometimes the place you're in is not fully developed, so only one part of it is completely visible. If you happen to look into a mirror or something where you can see your reflection, it may look off, maybe blurry. Did you notice anything like that? Izuku thought about it, trying to remember aspects of his nightmare. After a while, he nodded. The doctor's voice, it was weird. It didn't sound like him. And, usually, there are more people in the room when I'm there. But it was empty. He only had one tool in the dream, but he has more than that. Good. Next time, even if you can't do it while you're in the nightmare, try doing it when you wake up. Pick out what doesn't feel right about the dream. It can help you calm down and realize what you saw wasn't real. That you're safe. And, of course, Hisashi and I will always be here to help you out of it. Thank you. I'll try my best. Aizawa smiled and ruffled his hair one more time before taking his hand away and giving Izuku a small bento. I know you will. Here, eat. Izuku happily did so, taking small bites. It was delicious. He hadn't had such flavorful food in, well, since he could remember. Meals at the base were scarce and bland. He took all he could get most days, but on other days, he would skip food from occasional nausea. It ultimately made his nausea worse, but eating after a training session was hard. Izuku could only manage a few more bites before he could feel his stomach turning. He felt bad for not finishing the food, but Aizawa reassured him that it was no problem. He could always save it for later. When Izuku put the food away, Yamada came out of the bathroom in a different outfit and hairdo. His hair was now in a long, loose braid, and he had on more comfortable clothes than yesterday. He wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, no leather jacket in sight. He still had the blue headphones around his neck, though. Izuku wondered if it was a comfort or a practicality thing. Maybe both. Yamada took a seat on the other side of the bed, taking out his food immediately. I hope you know, listener, that this is a special occasion. Shoyuta here pretty much never cooks, he said teasingly, taking a bite of his food. Aizawa rolled his eyes. Oh, hush. You literally stop me from cooking most days. Don't know what you're talking about. Yamada smirked before taking more bites. Aizawa just stared at him with narrowed eyes, before looking at Izuku with a shake of his head. He's crazy, Aizawa mouthed to him, and Izuku giggled behind his hand. The three of them sat in comfortable silence. Izuku found himself looking out of the window. He missed the outside. It was rare that he was allowed outside back at the base. Sensei would make him do whatever he wanted to earn the privilege to go outside. Even then, it was heavily supervised and on a strict time limit. He wasn't sure what the villains were so worried about. He was too weak to walk, let alone escape from experienced villains, especially from Sensei. Their peaceful atmosphere was broken by the sound of a vibrating phone. Aizawa grunted and took out his phone, his jaw clenching when he read what the caller ID displayed. "I'll be right back," was all he said before Aizawa stepped out of the room. "Sakachi, please tell me you have good news this time." Eraser. "Unfortunately, no. Look, I'm really sorry. I promise I did try my best here." "Just spit it out." Shoyuta didn't like where this was going. "Right. The chief wants answers, and he scheduled a questioning with the kid on Tuesday." Shoyuta squeezed his eyes shut, hand on his temple. Fuck, that was 3 days away, not enough time. Not at all. The kid was just barely opening up about his experience to Hisashi and him. But in front of a stranger? "Sakachi." "Aizawa, I know. There was nothing I could do. The chief is not backing down on this. The only thing I could compromise on was having me be the one to ask the questions. It was easy enough, given my quirk. And I promise I'll be as patient as possible. I've worked with kids who suffered traumatic experiences before. I will do all I can to make sure the kid is comfortable." Shoyuta sighed. He knew Sakachi was good at his job and would probably be the best to handle this case. But still, he couldn't help that small, protective instinct from flaring at the thought of the kid having to recount his trauma just to get the chief his answers. "Okay, I'll let Izuku know so he's prepared. Will you guys still be at the hospital by then?" Shoyuta hummed. "Most likely. I'll message you if anything changes." "All right. Bye, Eraser." "Bye." The call ended, and Shoyuta stood there for a little longer, calming himself down. He shouldn't go back in angry. That would just scare the kid. Shoyuta hated this, but there wasn't much he could do. All he could do was make sure the kid was ready to talk about whatever Sakachi would ask. Shoyuta finally made his way back inside the room. Hisashi and Izuku were talking about something, but Shoyuta couldn't focus on anything other than the anxiety he felt about having to be the messenger for this dreadful conversation. Shoyuta sat on the bed, ending the conversation between the two. Hisashi turned to him, and, knowing Shoyuta like the back of his hand, frowned. "Is everything okay? Who was on the phone?" Izuku looked a little nervous, as if he could feel the tense energy coming off of him. Shoyuta rubbed a hand down his face and decided he needed to get this over with. "That was Detective Sakachi. He's the lead detective on your case, Izuku. The chief, has been looking for the people responsible for you and others who have been caught up in the quirk trafficking. Since you are the only survivor we have physically found, the chief wants answers." Shoyuta paused, gauging how Izuku was taking in the information. It was not that well. Izuku had tells when he was feeling nervous and upset. He started gripping the blankets, and his eyes would dart around in uncertainty. His breathing would pick up, and in extreme cases, his body would start shaking. Shoyuta didn't want it to get to that, so he placed a hand over Izuku's left one. "Detective Sakachi will be the one asking the questions. I trust him. He will do his best to make you comfortable, okay? And Hisashi and I will be right next to you the whole time. The chief is pushing this on us, but they will go at your pace. Do you understand?" He kept his voice soft. Izuku nodded, his focus now solely on Shuta's hand. His breathing was evened out now, so Shoyuta took that as a win. Hisashi was upset, he could tell, but he was holding back for the kid. "When will Sakachi be coming?" Hisashi asked. Shoyuta sighed. "Tuesday." "What?" Hisashi screeched, and Shoyuta immediately used his quirk on him so it wouldn't blow out their eardrums. Izuku flinched at the sound, but he kept a strong grip on Shuta's hand. Sorry. It's just, that's so soon. Hisashi hissed, his voice significantly quieter. I know. Tsukachi did all he could, but the chief is relentless. The only thing he could do was be here to question the kid. Hisashi shook his head, and Shoyuta could tell he was still angry. Shoyuta turned his attention back to Izuku. The kid was still staring at their hands. While Shoyuta was glad the kid wasn't panicking, it was almost like he was too calm. He wasn't speaking. Kid, you all right? Shoyuta coaxed, running his thumb over Izuku's hand to get his attention. Izuku looked up at him, but his eyes were slightly glazed over. Before Shoyuta could say anything, Izuku spoke up. I think so. This will help others, right? Izuku's voice was feeble, and Shuta's heart squeezed. Technically, yes, but Shoyuta sort of hoped Izuku would think more about himself first. Yeah, kid. This will help the heroes and police find whoever did this to you and other people and put a stop to it. Izuku nodded, looking more determined now. Okay, I'll do it. Shoyuta and Hisashi shared a glance, worried. But this was the best response they could have hoped for. All they could do now was be there in support and make sure it went as smoothly as possible. Chapter 8. The next couple of days passed by way too quickly. Hisashi stayed over each night, since Shoyuta still had his patrols to go on. After Izuku's X-ray on Saturday, the results showed that he had multiple fractures and breaks that hadn't healed correctly in both of his arms and his left leg. The doctor told them that Izuku would likely suffer from chronic fracture pain if not taken care of immediately. The doctor suggested physical therapy and over-the-counter pain medication. When the doctor saw that Izuku was learning sign language, he strongly encouraged him to continue. He had said that using sign language can strengthen the hand and arm muscles, and it would be a productive way of recovering. On Monday, Shoyuta stayed with Izuku all day and did paperwork at the hospital while Hisashi taught at UA. For Tuesday, Tsukachi was able to push the questioning back until late afternoon to accommodate Hisashi and make sure he would be able to make it. Even though Izuku had said he was fine with doing it, the boy was stressed, and it showed. He had nightmares almost every time he went to sleep. He had multiple panic attacks, and throughout the day, he would barely speak or eat. Shoyuta had half a mind to demand that the police chief postpone the questioning, not caring if the chief wanted it or not. Yet, every time he asked Izuku about it, he wouldn't back down. Shoyuta figured it was best to get it over with now. Once Tuesday came around, Shoyuta kept a close eye on him. He did the past few days, but especially for today, he had to make sure Izuku was as comfortable as possible. The boy wasn't eating. Shoyuta tried everything, but Izuku simply refused to. Shoyuta let it go for now and hoped the nutrients from Izuku's food would be enough. The day went on just like the others. Shoyuta worked on his laptop, and Izuku looked out the window. Hisashi had bought a few things for the kid on Sunday. He bought some books, puzzles, coloring books, and fidget toys for Izuku to use whenever he was feeling anxious. The fidget toys got some use, and Izuku was fiddling with one now. It did seem to help him relax, but Shoyuta could still see the tension in his shoulders. The day passed on like that, and eventually, Hisashi came into the room. It was both a good and a bad thing. Good for the obvious reasons, but bad because it meant that Tsukachi would be here soon. Izuku barely reacted when Hisashi greeted him. Hisashi shot Shoyuta a dejected look, and Shoyuta just frowned. Hisashi sat next to Shoyuta on the chair, keeping his hands out of sight from the kid. Has he been like this all day? Shoyuta nodded. He didn't eat, either. Hisashi ran a hand through his hair. It was just down today. He had fixed it after teaching at UA. I'm worried, Shoyuta. It's like all progress from Friday and Saturday has vanished. If this is how he's reacting now, what will happen later? We will be there with him the whole way. If he regresses further, we will be there to pull him out, however long it will take. Hisashi nodded, grabbing Shuta's hand for support. Shoyuta leaned forward, kissing him softly. Hisashi smiled and pressed their foreheads together. They would get through this and take care of Izuku as best they could. The only warning Shoyuta received about Tsukachi's arrival was a simple, "Here," text message. And Hisashi said he was a horrible texter. At least they could do it from the hospital room. Shoyuta stood from his chair, walking over to Izuku. The kid was still staring out the window, so Shoyuta had to intercept. Hey kid, the detective will be up soon, he told him. Izuku blinked up at him. His gaze was focused, so that was good. Okay, that seemed like it would be all he would say. Shoyuta nodded and went back to his seat, but was stopped when Izuku's hand shot out to grab his sleeve. He turned in mild surprise and melted at Izuku's sad eyes. Please sit with me, he whispered. Shoyuta immediately complied, making a gesture for Izuku to scooch over. He did, so Shoyuta sat down next to him. Izuku leaned against him, and Shoyuta wrapped a loose arm around Izuku's shoulders. Hisashi smiled at them, and he set up his chair so that he was on the other side of Izuku. He was sure that if the bed were bigger, Hisashi would find his way there with them. We're both here for you, listener. And remember, if you don't want to answer anything, you don't have to. Izuku nodded, and he looked better. Shoyuta was worried that with his behavior these past few days, he'd be worse, but he was relieved. He just had to hope Tsukachi wouldn't ruin that. Izuku was nervous. Extremely nervous. He had no idea what this detective Tsukachi would ask, what Izuku would have to expose. What if Yamada and Aizawa didn't want him after what he would tell Tsukachi? Some part of him hoped that the heroes would stay with him after everything. There was a knock on the door, and after Aizawa called for them to come in, the door opened. A man came in, wearing a long, beige trench coat. He had short, dark brown hair and tired yet kind eyes. Hi, Izuku. How are you? He asked him, and Izuku was surprised. He didn't think he would be addressed so quickly. I am good, thank you. How are you? Izuku gripped the blankets, and Aizawa gently unwound his fingers and held his hand instead. Tsukachi smiled and sat down in the empty chair. I'm doing well. I'm sorry we had to meet under these circumstances. Oh, it's okay. Izuku looked up at Aizawa, not sure how to feel. You're doing great, kid. Aizawa whispered down at him, and Izuku nodded, feeling more assured. Izuku turned back to face the detective. He took out a notebook and pen, the notebook already open in his lap. He also had what looked like a recorder. So, Izuku, I'll tell you how this will go so you don't face any surprises. My quirk is human lie detector, so whatever you say to me, I will know if you're telling the truth or a lie, okay? Most of my questions will focus on the quirk trafficking. Just answer anything you know. If you don't want to answer, that is fine. If you need a break, please let me know, and we'll pause for however long you need. Izuku took in the information and nodded along. It sounded reasonable enough. He wouldn't lie about anything anyway, and even if he did, Tsukachi would know. Oh, also, one unfortunate drawback to my quirk is that I will need a verbal response for it to be activated. It may be inconvenient, I know, but I will work with you to make sure you and anyone else involved are given justice, Tsukachi promised. Izuku's lips trembled, and he nodded. Thank you, he whispered, and Tsukachi's eyes softened. Of course, you're in control here. Izuku gave a watery smile. Before we begin, do you consent to being recorded during this? He asked, recorder already on to record his response. Why yes, I do, Izuku said, and Tsukachi nodded before flipping through this notebook. All right, this is Detective Naomasa Tsukachi interviewing Izuku Midoriya about the quirk trafficking case. I will begin questioning momentarily. Izuku flinched a bit at his family name being used. Please, can you please call me Izuku? Tsukachi nodded. Of course, Izuku. I'm sorry. It's for formality's sake. Izuku let out a breath of relief. Okay, first question. Izuku, how did you end up with the villains? Okay, wow. Hard questions right away. My dad brought me to them. True. And who is your dad? Hisashi Midoriya. True. Do you know why your dad brought you there, Izuku? Did he want you to join the villains? No. Well, kind of. I was de-diagnosed. Izuku's throat closed up, and he squeezed Aizawa's hand. It's okay, Izuku. Take your time, Tsukachi said, his voice sincere. I was diagnosed as quirkless when I turned 4, and he didn't like it. Tsukachi hummed, and he made a note. True. Can you elaborate on why he brought you to the villains because of your quirk status? Izuku let out a breath. He was really mad. Hisashi always said how excited he was for me to get a quirk when I was growing up. When my mom told him the news, he couldn't accept it. Hisashi left for a few days, and when he came back, he said he had a solution. And Mommy was upset, but Hisashi didn't care. He took me away after setting the house on fire. He killed her, Izuku whispered, tears falling, and his breath hitched. Aizawa was running his fingers through Izuku's hair and whispering reassurances. Yamada took hold of Izuku's other hand and offered silent support. After a little bit, he calmed down and wiped the tears away on his sleeve. All true. Tsukachi's voice was soft, and he looked concerned. Are you able to continue, Izuku? Izuku nodded. Why, yes. I'm fine, he said, trying to convince himself more than anyone else. Tsukachi frowned, the statement probably coming up as a lie, but Izuku continued before he lost his nerve. After he did that, he brought me to this building, the same one I was found in. He told me that I could get a quirk as long as I behaved. I was terrified, but I didn't want him to hurt me either, so I listened to him. True. And how is this possible? How were you going to get a quirk? Tsukachi asked him. Izuku's heart was pounding. He was terrified, but he had to be brave. He brought me to this person. Hisashi told me that he knew someone who could give and take quirks easily. He called himself sensei, but I know who he really is, Izuku whispered. Tsukachi paused in his writing. The room was tense. Izuku, who was it? Izuku inhaled and exhaled shakily. All for one. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees, and Izuku shivered. He never called sensei by his real identity, and even though he wasn't present, Izuku still felt like saying his name would make him appear somehow. Tsukachi didn't say anything for a long moment. He wrote something in his notebook and opened his mouth. True. Izuku was staring at his lap. He was too nervous to see anyone else's reactions. He knew who All for One was, what his reputation was. He had supposedly gone into hiding to steal quirks and continue his operation behind the scenes of the League. Izuku, before being brought to him, thought he was a myth. And most heroes did, too. So he knew this would be shocking. Aizawa and Yamada still held his hand, but Aizawa's other hand paused in his hair. After a moment, he resumed, and Izuku significantly relaxed. Tsukachi cleared his throat and shifted in his seat. All right, Izuku. Thank you for telling me. Did All for One give you a quirk? Izuku looked back up at him and shook his head. No, he didn't. Tsukachi tilted his head, confused. True. What happened? Izuku sighed. He was angry at Hisashi. He thought that I was older. Sensei said there was no way my body would be strong enough to suddenly gain a quirk. Instead of letting me leave, though, he said he still had use for me. Izuku shuddered but continued. Since I was quirkless, he said it was a lot rarer these days than before. Instead of wasting the opportunity, as he called it, he would train my body to develop a quirk naturally. Said it was a new project he wanted to try. I was a clean slate. Tsukachi was writing a lot, and it kind of concerned Izuku. True. Izuku, how long did this go on for? Well, I got my first quirk months into being there. It took constant training and experimentation. Izuku trailed off. His body was feeling fuzzy, and his grip on reality was fading. Before he could be pulled into a painful memory, he felt someone touch his cheek. Izuku blinked, and suddenly, all he could see was Yamada in front of him. He looked sad, and Izuku didn't like that look on him at all. Baby, are you back with us? Yamada whispered. Izuku blinked a few more times before looking to his left. Aizawa was still next to him. I think so, he mumbled, shaking his head slightly to get rid of the foggy feeling. He wasn't sure how long he was out for, but it couldn't have been too long, because Tsukachi was still here. The man looked apologetic and a bit awkward, like he wasn't sure if he should have witnessed that. Yamada sat back down reluctantly, letting Izuku get a full view of Tsukachi. I'm really sorry, Izuku. I didn't mean to trigger anything. Izuku just shook his head. It's okay. It's not your fault, Izuku assured him, and he could hear Aizawa mutter something under his breath that sounded like it kind of is his fault. Before he could question it, Tsukachi spoke. Just a few more questions, okay? Then we're all done. After Izuku confirmed he was fine to continue, Tsukachi began his questioning once again. We have some reports of people going missing over the past couple of years. We haven't found them, but there have been rumors about some of those people walking into that place with a quirk and then out quirkless. Do you know anything about that? Izuku frowned, trying to remember what he saw. Maybe. Sometimes, during my breaks, I would see Sensei talking to some people I didn't know or had never seen hanging around the base. I think Sensei was taking these people's quirks to get stronger. Sukachi sighed. True. It's what we've suspected, then. Okay, last two questions, I promise. Do you know any other villains, besides your father, who were involved? Izuku nodded quickly. This, he could answer confidently. Why yes. There was Kurojiri. He would be the one to supervise me outside of training or experiments, and give me food. He has a warp quirk that allows him to go and take people wherever he wants, as long as he knows the exact coordinates. There's Dabi. I haven't seen him much, but he has blue flames that burn him as he uses them. I've also seen twice, Mr. Compress and Spinner, but I haven't been around them a lot to know what their quirks were. Oh, and the doctor. He is the one who would carry out the experiments on me. Izuku whispered the last part, anxiety spiking again. Sukachi was writing all of the names down and as much information as he could. The room was filled with the sound of pen on paper until he was finished. Thank you, Izuku. Last one. Do you have any idea where they had run off to? He thought about it for a moment, but he really didn't know. Izuku didn't even know they had somewhere else to go. Sensei and Kurojiri had never mentioned it to him, at least. No, I'm sorry. Sukachi smiled. True. And it's okay, Izuku. You've been a great help here. Izuku felt better at that. Sukachi made some last notes in his book before closing it. All right, this concludes my questioning with Izuku Midoriya. And he turned the recorder off. Izuku slumped against Aizawa, exhausted. He was so glad it was over. Sukachi gathered what he needed and smiled kindly at Izuku. Thank you so much, Izuku. You've been so brave, and we will do our best to make sure those people will never hurt you or others again, okay? Izuku nodded, but he couldn't respond. He felt so drained. All the stress, anxiety, and tiredness from the past few days were weighing on him now. He zoned out when Sukachi spoke to Aizawa and Yamada briefly before leaving. When the door closed to his room, it was like his body had given up because he immediately started crying. Loud sobs echoed in the room, and he could feel Aizawa wrap his arms around him tightly. Aizawa lifted Izuku gently and held him in his lap so that Yamada could sit next to them comfortably, and he also wrapped his arms around both of them. They held him as he cried, and Izuku had never felt so cared for. He felt safe, even if he was crying because of the painful memories he was remembering. Izuku could hear them both talking, but he couldn't make it out. It took a while, but eventually, Izuku's sobs had dwindled to sniffles and occasional tears. His chest hurt and his arms were sore, but he wasn't focused on that right now. Above all, he felt warm. Aizawa and Yamada were still holding him. Izuku leaned his head back against Aizawa's chest, tired. So tired. Rest, little listener. You did amazing. We are so proud of you. He heard Yamada whisper, and Izuku tilted his head to look at him. Yamada's eyes were rimmed red, and tears were glistening in his eyes, but Izuku could tell it was because of his own breakdown. Yamada was a huge empath, it seemed. Izuku couldn't bring himself to speak, so he just weakly nodded, and his eyes fluttered shut. Sitting up like this wasn't the most comfortable position, but he didn't care. He didn't want to lose their warmth. Chapter 9. Shoyuta was seething. He had to make sure he wasn't accidentally squeezing the kid as he stewed in his anger. Hisashi was the same. He didn't have to speak to know that they were thinking the same thing. The chief had gone too far. Shoyuta didn't care about Sukachi. He was doing his job and made sure Izuku was okay the whole way through. Hisashi was right, though. Seeing Izuku cry was terrible, and he never wanted it to happen again. They sat like that for a long time. It was still early evening, so Shoyuta had time until his patrol. Izuku probably wouldn't wake up until the next morning. Shoyuta ended up taking a small nap, leaning back against the pillows with Izuku still in his lap. Later, he woke up to Hisashi shaking his arm. He opened his eyes, noticing that it was dark outside already. Shoyuta hummed and glanced over at Hisashi. It's late, Sho. You should probably go home and get ready for patrol. Shoyuta sighed but nodded. I'll take the little listener. I feel like he shouldn't be alone tonight. Shoyuta agreed. He maneuvered himself so that Izuku was off his lap, making sure not to aggravate any of his injuries. Izuku whined softly and shifted. Hisashi quickly took over, holding Izuku in his arms. The kid immediately settled, sighing softly through his nose. Hisashi quietly cooed. "Sho, look at him," he whisper-yelled. Shoyuta huffed. I know. He hid a smile in his capture weapon. Shoyuta leaned down to kiss Hisashi briefly. "Okay, I'm going. I'll text you when I'm done. And get some sleep. I know you've been staying awake until I'm done patrol," he said in a stern tone. Hisashi pouted. "Finny." Shoyuta gave the kid one more pat on the head before leaving. The next few days passed surprisingly well. After Izuku woke up from his long sleep, he seemed to be feeling better, as if the interview never happened. However, now Izuku asked Hisashi to sleep in the bed with him each night. Hisashi was ecstatic. After the questioning on Tuesday, Izuku was seen by a different doctor, Dr. Akino, who specializes in healing broken and fractured limbs. Since Izuku's were healed incorrectly, she had to be a lot more careful when using her quirk. Since this was done by a quirk and not regular surgery, Izuku wouldn't have to take anesthesia. It was painless. Dr. Akino told them that tissue inflammation was normal, and if Izuku experienced any symptoms, not to worry. However, if they did not subside after a long period, they would have to come back. The physical therapy was going well. The doctor who originally told them about Izuku's fractures on Saturday, Dr. Hayashi, had shown Shoyuta and Hisashi the exercises Izuku should be doing every day to strengthen his hand and arm muscles. For Izuku's leg, Dr. Hayashi was helping Izuku walk. His legs were still weak, especially the left one, but he needed to be able to move around. They started slow, and Izuku could stand for just over 2 minutes before feeling like he would collapse. The doctor told Shoyuta and Hisashi that this was easy to do at home. The kid would just have to either use their arms to steady himself or something like metal bars on either side of him, much like the ones at the hospital. Since Izuku was young, if he kept up with the physical therapy and took his medication regularly, Dr. Hayashi assured the two heroes that he would likely reduce his pain significantly. To keep up on muscle strength, Izuku would also need a proper dietary plan that also satisfied his malnourished state. Luckily, his body temperature was stabilized. Nurse Sato told them to keep an eye on it and to make sure he stayed warm at home. Lastly, the issue with his suppression cuff was looming over them. They still didn't know how to take it off or how to broach the subject without triggering another panic attack. Hisashi had been doing some research, but it was hard to gather information on something that wasn't legal or supposed to exist, especially in such a unique situation. Hisashi came up with the idea of reassuring Izuku that should his quirk could cancel his out at any moment. If Izuku was worried about losing control of his quirks, Shoyuta was the perfect person to help. If there was still an issue, or Izuku's quirks really were too powerful for Shoyuta to even handle, they would come up with a solution as always. Throughout all of that, Shoyuta was finalizing Hisashi's and his emergency foster licenses. He went through all the legal processes with Tsukachi, and all they needed was Izuku's consent. Well, technically, it wasn't needed, but Shoyuta and Hisashi wanted to make sure Izuku's opinion was heard and taken into consideration. Hisashi was sure that Izuku would say yes, but Shoyuta had stupid doubts in the back of his mind. Logically, he knew Izuku felt safe around them. But what if taking him home and looking after him long-term was completely different? Regardless, they had to ask Izuku today, since his discharge was being completed with the doctor. Izuku was awake and using the coloring book Hisashi bought. It was a hero-themed one, and the kid was currently coloring in All Might. He looked adorable with his focused face, tongue poking out as he tried his best to stay in the lines. While Hisashi was at UA, Shoyuta had to wait to ask Izuku about guardianship. However, Hisashi said it was fine if he tried to get Izuku to agree to taking the cuff off. Shoyuta wondered how strong the thing was, considering how long Izuku had had it on for. Shoyuta leaned over to see Izuku's progress. For an 8-year-old with limited hand and wrist mobility, it wasn't bad. Only a few colors strayed outside the lines. "Looks great, kid. Do you like All Might?" Izuku nodded enthusiastically without taking his attention off the page. All Might's the best. He's my favorite hero." Shoyuta huffed. He was glad the villains hadn't diluted Izuku's love for heroes, even if his favorite had to be the very loud and obnoxious one. I bet. Shoyuta let the kid color for a bit longer before deciding to talk to him about the cuff. He didn't know when a good time to ask was, so better now than later. Hey, Izuku, can I talk to you for a minute? He kept his voice light, not wanting to cause any unwanted stress. It didn't seem to work, though, when Izuku's body tensed up, as if waiting for bad news. Izuku put the book to the side and looked at Shoyuta, hands twitching as if wanting to grab for the blanket. He curled them into fists instead, almost invisible under the long sleeves. Shoyuta softened his expression and leaned forward to place his hand over Izuku's right one. Don't worry, you're not in trouble or anything. I just wanted to ask you something, Shoyuta said, and Izuku relaxed slightly. Almost there, but Shoyuta would take it. I know Hisashi asked you this already, but do you want to reconsider not taking the cuff off? He asked cautiously, keeping an eye on Izuku's mood so he knew when to push and when not to. Izuku squirmed a little, but no signs of a panic attack coming so far. He was quiet for a moment before speaking. I don't want to hurt you guys, Izuku whispered. Shoyuta expected this, so he had a response. Please don't worry about that, Izuku. Do you remember what my quirk does? Izuku immediately perked up, his eyes shining. Why yes, it's so cool. Well, that was one way to cheer the kid up. Shoyuta couldn't help but chuckle at Izuku's excitement. Thanks, kid. If you feel like your quirks are getting out of control, I can easily help. I can erase them. Izuku looked contemplative, like he hadn't thought of that before. He still seemed nervous, but more open to the idea. I'm just scared. I know, kid. It's normal to feel that way, but I've taught many students who could barely control their quirks. You'll be in safe hands. Izuku looked a lot more reassured at that. I just don't know how to take it off. Kirojiri, would put it on and lock it. But Sensei usually just broke it when he wanted it off. He lifted his left arm so Shoyuta could see the cuff clearly. Shoyuta gingerly took his arm and examined the cuff more closely. There was a keyhole on the inside. It was small, but Shoyuta could work with it. I think I know how to take it off. Don't tell Zashi, though. He smirked and rifled through his pocket until he found what he was looking for. Izuku watched him curiously when he took out a couple of bobby pins and paper clips. Shoyuta sat down on the bed so he would have a better way to reach the cuff. Hisashi tells me this is unhero-like, but honestly, these have saved me during many patrols. More importantly, it will help get this off, he said while positioning his tools and getting to work. Izuku watched him intently as Shoyuta picked the lock. It was a bit difficult, but he got it eventually. With a click, the cuff fell off, and Izuku tensed as his quirks presumably roared back to life. Shoyuta watched him, ready to use erasure if anything happened. Izuku sat there silently, his body shaking a bit. He clenched his fists, but nothing happened. Izuku seemed to realize that, too, and he slumped forward in relief. Shoyuta wrapped an arm around the kid, pulling him close to his chest. See? Nothing to worry about. Shoyuta rubbed circles on Izuku's back, much like he did the night he saved him. It's just, I've rarely not used my quirks when this is off. It's different. Sensei W would push me a lot, make me use them in ways I didn't. His breathing hitched, and Shoyuta just continued to rub his back comfortingly. Izuku sniffled and wrapped his arms around Shoyuta, completing the hug. He would force me to use them to hurt, and I never wanted to. I swear I didn't. It sounded like Izuku was trying to convince him he wasn't a bad person, and should his heart just kept breaking. I know, Izuku. I know you didn't. You're so strong. Hisashi and I both know that. You went through so much for so long, but you're not alone anymore. You don't have to hold everything in. You can lean on us, Shoyuta whispered against Izuku's curls, but he knew the kid could hear him. Izuku's shoulders were shaking, and Shoyuta could feel his tears dripping onto his shirt. The kid didn't speak, so Shoyuta just held him as he cried. It didn't take long for the kid to calm down, and he shifted and should his hold. Izuku wiped his eyes, and he tilted his head up to look at Shoyuta. Izuku was just looking at him, and Shoyuta was about to ask if he was okay before subtle hints of mirth appeared in the kid's eyes. See, can you show me how to pick locks just like that? Shoyuta snorted and ruffled his kid's hair. As long as you don't tell Hisashi. Don't tell Hisashi what? Speak of the devil and he may appear. Izuku turned in his arms, and Shoyuta adjusted so they could both see Hisashi walking into the room. He looked vaguely suspicious as he made his way over. "Don't worry about it," was all Shoyuta would say. Hisashi put his hands on his hips, and he turned his gaze on Izuku instead, expectant, clearly thinking Izuku would spill. In a surprising turn of events, though, Izuku mimed zipping his lip, locking it, and throwing away the key. Shuta's eyebrows raised as he let out a laugh, and Hisashi looked scandalized. "Shoyuta, what are you teaching the baby?" Shoyuta just smirked and said nothing. Izuku looked happy, and Hisashi was gleeful. The kid was comfortable enough joking with them, and that was a big step. Hisashi huffed and flopped onto his chair. "Fine, keep your secrets. I got my eyes on you," he said, pointing 2 fingers at his eyes, then at Izuku's. The kid giggled and hid his face and shook his chest. Shoyuta continued rubbing Izuku's back. Hisashi and he shared a look, both content that Izuku was in a good mood. Probably the best mood he's been in since being at the hospital. Shoyuta leaned down and whispered in Izuku's ear, "Do you want to show Hisashi your arm?" Izuku nodded and shifted so that he could face Hisashi. Aizawa helped me take the cuff off." Izuku lifted his left arm and showed it to Hisashi. Hisashi sat up in his chair, shocked but relieved. "That's great, kiddo. Do you feel all right?" Izuku nodded and put his arm back down. "Why, yes. I'm sorry that I panicked when you asked about it," Izuku whispered, looking a bit dejected. Hisashi shook his head. "Hey, like I said, no need to apologize, listener. Your feelings are always valid, okay? I'm just glad you felt more comfortable this time to let Sho take it off for you. He told you how his quirk can help." "Yeah, he did." Hisashi smiled, satisfied. "Perfect." The 3 sat in silence for a while before Hisashi suddenly jerked up. "Wait a minute. Sho, how did you unlock it?" He raised a brow, the suspicious look from earlier returning. Shoyuta suddenly thought the outside view was interesting, ignoring Hisashi's question. Izuku watched the 2 of them carefully, probably trying to figure out if Hisashi was actually upset or not. Hisashi groaned, already knowing the answer. "Normally, I would scold you for this, but I guess this time it came in handy." "So, you agree the lockpicking can be useful?" Shoyuta looked at Hisashi smugly. "Only this once. That's it," Shoyuta hummed. "If you say so." Izuku seemed to pick up on the light atmosphere and settled back against Shoyuta. Hisashi decided to change the subject, asking Izuku about his progress on the coloring book. Izuku animatedly showed Hisashi his recent All Might page and then flipped through the other heroes he had colored so far: Edshot, Best Jeanist, and Present Mike. "Beautiful little listener. I think this one is the best," he said, pointing at the page of himself. "Biased much?" Shoyuta muttered teasingly. Hisashi scoffed. "Of course not. It is a completely, 100%, unbiased opinion." Shoyuta and Hisashi bickered playfully back and forth, the kid quietly laughing to himself as he watched them. Later on, there was a knock on the door, and it opened to reveal Dr. Hayashi. Izuku tensed up briefly. Shoyuta squeezed Izuku's hand, and the kid relaxed against him. "Come in," Shoyuta called, and Dr. Hayashi didn't waste a moment. "Hey, everyone. I have Izuku's discharge papers here, as well as instructions for physical therapy, medication, and symptoms to look out for during his recovery. I just need a guardian's signature, and you're all set to go." The room went silent. Shoyuta and Hisashi still had to ask Izuku about fostering. Izuku's relaxed posture didn't last long. He was nervous after Dr. Hayashi said the last thing. Dr. Hayashi left the papers with Hisashi, who took them and said a goodbye and thank you. After Dr. Hayashi left, Izuku curled into himself a bit. Hisashi set the papers aside immediately and focused only on the kid. Shoyuta did too. "Hey, sweetheart. What are you thinking right now?" Izuku sniffled and took a moment to collect his thoughts. "I don't have a guardian, right?" Hisashi. The kid's voice broke off, his breath hitching, and tears welled in his eyes. Shoyuta rubbed Izuku's arm gently and pulled him in again. Izuku didn't resist, so Shoyuta kept a firm hold on him to calm him down. "We're sorry, kid. We meant to talk to you about this, and we put it off for too long. Hisashi and I. Well, we wanted to ask if you'd be okay with us taking you in. If we could be your guardians." Shoyuta held his breath as he analyzed Izuku's expression. He looked up, eyes flickering between Hisashi and him. The kid looked shocked and confused. I don't understand, Izuku whispered. Hisashi took over this time. We'd bring you home, listener. You'd live with us. Shoyuta and I will protect you, care for you, and make sure you have everything you need. Izuku's eyes welled up again, and Shoyuta wasn't sure if this was a good or bad reaction. But why? Izuku asked in a broken voice. Hisashi and Shuta's expressions mirrored each other, sorrowful. Oh, baby. Hisashi moved so he was sitting on the edge of the bed, taking both of Izuku's hands. Because we care about you. We want you to be safe, listener. You deserve to live your life, grow, and experience your childhood without pain. And Shoyuta and I want to be there to help you achieve that. Izuku broke down at that, chest heaving and shoulders shaking. Shoyuta rocked him side to side slowly, hoping to soothe him. He could see that Hisashi was about to cry along with him, but he kept his composure. Why you're not mad? Izuku got out between cries, confusing them both. Mad? Kid, why would we be mad at you? Shoyuta questioned softly, not pausing in his rocking. I didn't tell you about all for one, and I was quirkless, and my quirks didn't come in normally. Izuku, we would never be mad at you for that. Even if you were quirkless now, we wouldn't ever think of you differently. Same with how your quirks manifested. That was out of your control. You went through so much, something no one should ever have to go through. Quirks or no, we would still ask you to come home with us. As for all for one, Hisashi shuddered at the name. That information was yours to tell. Even if Tsukachi never asked about him, and you didn't bring it up, we wouldn't mind. You did what you had to for your own safety. Izuku's lips trembled. While his sobs had calmed down, he was still crying pretty heavily. Oh, really? Shoyuta answered this time. Really, kid? So what do you say? For a moment, Izuku said nothing. Shuta's doubts came back full force, but before he could start to worry, Izuku's head nodded up and down. I want that, he whispered, voice hoarse from crying. Hisashi beamed and leaned forward to wrap Shoyuta and Izuku in his arms. Shoyuta couldn't help the smile forming on his face, leaning into his touch. They were bringing Izuku home. Chapter 10. After Izuku calmed down enough, they got ready to finally leave the hospital. Shoyuta and Hisashi signed the discharge forms. Hisashi brought it to the front desk, while Shoyuta cleaned up and gathered Izuku's things. In between days at the hospital, Shoyuta had practically given the kid his wardrobe. At the moment, Izuku was wearing a gray sweatshirt with a cat on it and black sweatpants. He had socks on, too, but no shoes. When Shoyuta found him, he wasn't wearing any, and he didn't know the kid's shoe size. It would have to do for now. Shoyuta packed up all his things, which really were only the things Hisashi bought for him, and placed them in bags. Hisashi came back with a wheelchair. Hey, listener, ready to go? You can use this, and I'll push it for you. Izuku nodded and positioned himself at the end of the bed. He was about to get down before Shoyuta stopped him. Whoa, not so fast. You shouldn't put any pressure on your legs just yet. Here. Shoyuta placed an arm around Izuku's back and under his knees before slowly picking him up. Izuku quickly latched onto him, and Shoyuta set him in the wheelchair. Thanks, Izuku muttered, and he adjusted himself to sit comfortably. Hisashi made sure they had everything before he started wheeling Izuku out. Are you excited to go outside, little listener? Hisashi asked, and Izuku nodded with an excited smile. Yes, I can't wait. Shoyuta was sure he was. After days of only accessing the outside from a window, it will be a nice change of scenery. They arrived on the ground floor, and Hisashi continued wheeling Izuku out of the hospital. Once they made it out the doors, Hisashi went at a slower pace. Shoyuta figured this was so Izuku could savor the outside. Izuku looked around in awe as he took in their surroundings. After a moment, the kid closed his eyes and let the breeze wash over him. He looked so peaceful like this. For once, Shoyuta was a bit regretful that their house didn't have much of a backyard. Hisashi and he eventually made it to their car, and they were both reluctant to let this moment end. Shoyuta just handed Hisashi the bags so he could get the car ready, and he crouched down in front of Izuku. Hey kid, we gotta put you in the car, Shoyuta said, placing a hand on Izuku's knee. The kid blinked his eyes open and glanced down at Shoyuta, noticeably sad that he wouldn't be able to stay outside any longer. How about this? We can roll the window down for you. You won't be outside completely, but at least you will be able to feel the wind. Izuku seemed satisfied with that, so he nodded. Shoyuta stood and opened the back car door, picking up Izuku the same way he did earlier and gently set him on the car's seat. Shoyuta put his seatbelt on, and he genuinely wondered if the kid should have a booster seat because of how small he was. He shut the door and went around to the passenger's side, getting in. Hisashi was already in the driver's seat by the time Shoyuta got settled and the car started. Shoyuta instructed Hisashi to roll the kid's window down, and then they were on their way home. Izuku felt a bit surreal. The wind was blowing on his face and in his hair, and he loved it. He tried to take in all the nature and infrastructure they passed, but it was a little overwhelming. Izuku's last few years have just been concrete walls and pain. But now, he felt a sliver of hope as his guardians. Pro-heroes were his guardians, took him to their house. Eventually, the car turned into a house driveway. Izuku looked up at it, eyes wide. It wasn't huge, but definitely bigger than the one he lived in before. Before Izuku could stare at it for any longer, Yamada opened his door for him. He was smiling. "Home sweet home, little listener. Can I take you inside?" Izuku nodded and held his arms up to him. Yamada clicked the seatbelt off before carefully picking him up out of the car. Yamada situated Izuku on his hip with Izuku's arms loosely wrapped around his neck. Izuku thought he was a bit too old to be carried like this, but Yamada didn't seem to mind. Aizawa was already at the door, unlocking it and going inside. "Hurry before the cats run outside," he grumbled. Yamada chuckled and followed him in, kicking the door shut with his leg. Izuku looked around. It was pretty spacious. To his right, there was a living room with one big couch, a love seat, a rug, and a coffee table. Across from the couch sat a small TV. Straight ahead was an open kitchen, and to his right a small dining room with a table and 4 chairs. Next to the dining room was a hallway, but he couldn't see where it led to. Aizawa and Yamada had both taken their shoes off as Izuku took in the sight of their home. He also noticed many pictures and decorations, some of which he was sure Yamada put up. It made this place seem more like a home. Izuku heard a meow, and suddenly, a brown cat ran up to them. It brushed up against Aizawa's legs before doing the same to Yamada. Izuku watched, thinking the cat was very cute. "This is Sushi. Would you like to say hi to her?" Yamada asked him, and Izuku nodded. Yamada carefully set Izuku on his feet, then lowered him so he was sitting on his butt. Izuku thanked him and turned his attention to Sushi. Immediately, Sushi walked up to him and climbed onto his lap. Izuku smiled and held out his hand for her to sniff. Izuku's never had any pets, so this was new to him. Sushi sniffed his hand briefly before head-butting it, purring when Izuku started petting her. She was so soft. Izuku could sit here forever. Izuku was about to say something to Yamada and Aizawa, but something else caught his eye. Another cat, with black, orange, and white-colored fur, sat perched on the couch. It was eyeing him in suspicion, if cats could even make that expression. "Ah, that's Bastard. Sho named him, not me. He's a bit less cuddly than Sushi, so just be careful around him, 'kay?" Yamada warned, and Izuku nodded in understanding. Then, Bastard leapt off the couch and walked over to Izuku. Aizawa stepped forward, ready to move in case Bastard did anything. However, the cat just slowly made his way up to him. Sushi seemed uninterested and left Izuku's lap, trotting off to the living room. Bastard sniffed at Izuku for a while longer than Sushi did. In the end, Bastard seemed satisfied with something because he took Sushi's place in his lap and just sat there like he claimed him. Izuku tilted his head up to look at the heroes, and their looks of shock were comical enough to make him laugh. Yamada cracked first, playfully hitting Aizawa's shoulder. "Told ya, Bastard's just like you." Aizawa rolled his eyes, mumbling whatever. He patted Izuku on the head and walked down the mysterious hallway. Izuku turned his attention back to Bastard and tentatively started to pet him. The cat didn't react, so he just continued. Izuku felt himself relax the more he pet Bastard. Yamada crouched down a little away from them. "Wow, listener, you accomplished the impossible," he whispered in exaggerated awe. It took Sho a long time to get close to him. Bastard won't even let me near him some. Okay, well, a lot of the times. As if on cue, Bastard hissed at Yamada before he began to clean his paws. Izuku giggled and petted him some more. His legs were starting to hurt a bit from sitting on the hardwood floor, so he shifted and stretched them out. Bastard let out a meow and jumped off his lap, going back to his perch on the couch. Yamada laughed and stood back up. All right, kiddo. Want to see your room? Izuku gasped softly, his arms raised instinctively for Yamada to pick him up. In my room? Izuku questioned, positioning himself the same way he did when Yamada carried him from the car. Yup, it's not quite decorated yet, but we can fix that easily. Yamada made his way down the hallway, and Izuku got a clearer look at what was down here. It led to a laundry room and another that had a closed door, so he didn't know what it was. Yamada didn't go there, though. He turned to the left and went up a flight of stairs. Pictures were lining the walls here, too, but Izuku couldn't really make out who was in them. He noticed some of Yamada and Aizawa and younger versions of them. Well, he assumed it was younger versions of them, since they looked familiar. At the top was another hallway. 2 doors sat on the left and 1 on the right. It was set up the opposite of how it was at the base, which put Izuku a little more at ease. The first door on the left was open, and he could see Aizawa rummaging around in a drawer. So, that was probably their room. This is Sho and Ai's room, Yamada confirmed, making Aizawa turn around briefly to give them a wave. Yamada stopped right in front of it. Our door is always open to you, okay? If you need anything, no matter the time, just come to us, Yamada said with a smile. Izuku nodded and waved back at Aizawa when Yamada started walking down the hallway. This, Yamada said after walking a few steps to the other door, is a bathroom. It'll be solely yours, since Sho and I have a bathroom connected to our room. Then, Yamada turned to the lone door on the other side of the hallway, right across from the bathroom and diagonal from the main bedroom. Yamada opened the door with a tada, and Izuku's eyes widened as he looked around it. It was big. Well, a lot bigger than he was used to, so he wasn't sure if he had the best judgment on that. The bed was across from the door, up against the wall, with a bedside table. There was a big window covered behind a curtain with a desk sitting beneath it, and next to the desk were 2 bookshelves. There weren't many books on them, but Izuku could already envision it being full. There were 2 closet doors at the back of the room, and on the wall adjacent to the door was a small table with a mirror sitting on top of it. There was a rug at the end of the bed shaped like a yellow flower, and another rectangular blue one beside the bed. If you think the rugs will be easier and more comfortable to walk on than the floor, let us know, okay? We can replace it with a full carpet. Also, I know it's pretty bare, but that's okay. If you want, we can do some online shopping for anything you like. What do you think? Underneath all the enthusiasm, Izuku could sense some nervous energy coming from Yamada. But honestly, the heroes could have told him to sleep on the couch, and it would have been more than what he deserved. This was all his. He couldn't believe it. I love it, he whispered and hugged Yamada, burying his face into his shoulder to hide his tears. Oh, I'm so glad, baby. Yamada cooed and tightened his hold on him. Do you want to settle in here? Or come downstairs with me? I'm going to cook us some lunch. Sho will be there, too. With you, Izuku muttered with almost no hesitation. He didn't feel like being alone right now. You got it. Yamada brought him out of the room and made his way downstairs. Aizawa was already in the kitchen making coffee for himself. Yamada set Izuku down on one of the stools in front of the kitchen island. Luckily, it had a backrest, so Izuku didn't have to hold himself up the whole time. Yamada ruffled Izuku's hair before taking out ingredients to make lunch. Once Aizawa had his coffee, he sat on the stool next to Izuku. They didn't speak, but that was okay. Izuku took a lot of comfort in silence with these two. The only sound was Yamada's humming as he cooked. The rest of the day was just as quiet and cozy. After lunch, Yamada sat with Izuku with his laptop and asked him the kind of things he would like in his new room. Izuku insisted that he was okay with how it was now, but Yamada and Aizawa convinced him to get some things. The fastest way to convince him was the hero merch, of course. Izuku ended up with a couple of new All Might posters and figurines. He got one of Present Mike, too, and that was his own choice. Yamada didn't even suggest it, and it made the hero emotional. In a good way. Izuku was bummed that there was no Eraserhead merch, and Yamada got a mischievous glint in his eye that made Aizawa glare at him. "Don't worry, listener. I know a way to get you some Eraserhead merch," Yamada stage whispered to him, making Izuku perk up. "Really?" "Yup," Yamada said, popping the P. Aizawa groaned and slumped down on the couch, but he didn't actually seem upset about it, so Izuku giggled. The only other thing Izuku asked for was a fluffy blanket, and of course, Yamada obliged. Now, the three of them were on the couch after finishing dinner. Izuku took another pill for his pain, since his arms and leg were feeling sore again. Aizawa was typing on his laptop, and Yamada was scrolling on his phone. Izuku was in between them, a blanket over his lap. Bastard was also lazing over Izuku's lap. He thought this morning was a once-off, but the cat had been following him closely all day. His tail was curling back and forth as Izuku pet him. Sushi was lying behind them, all on the back of the couch. The comforting atmosphere made Izuku doze off a bit. He kept his hand on Bastard, but the cat didn't seem to mind that he wasn't petting him anymore. At one point, Izuku had tilted to the side completely, head landing on Aizawa's shoulder. He was about to apologize and move, but Aizawa simply placed an arm across his shoulders, pulling him in closer. "If you're comfortable, go ahead, kid." Izuku huffed sleepily but didn't protest, just fell into deep sleep. Izuku woke up with a gasp, chest heaving and eyes darting around the dark room. Where was he? What's happening? Izuku blinked his eyes hard a few times, trying to make out the room he was in. Izuku felt tears running down the sides of his face, and he couldn't bring himself to get up. Izuku vaguely felt movement on his bed, and then it was gone. His door was slightly ajar, and he swore he saw movement in the space between. Before he could think about that, the remnants of his nightmare lingered. Izuku shuddered as the sound of Sensei's voice echoed in his ear, telling him that he would never escape him, he'd always be his. Izuku whimpered when he tried to move, so he stopped. He glanced up at the lamp that sat on his bedside table, and he was about to try to reach it when he heard footsteps coming down the hallway to the room. Izuku froze, but before he could panic, both Yamada and Aizawa pushed the door open. Relieved, Izuku remembered that he was in their home, and this was his room. Still baffled by that. Both heroes sat on his bed, Aizawa closest, and he placed a hand on Izuku's head. "What happened, kid?" "Nightmare." Izuku nodded, a sob escaping his lips as some of it flashed in his mind again. Aizawa ran his fingers through Izuku's hair gently, trying to calm him down. "Do you want to talk about it?" Aizawa asked, and he immediately shook his head. Okay, come here." Aizawa carefully positioned Izuku upright so that he could bring him in for a hug. Izuku wrapped his arms around Aizawa tightly, his breath shaky. He reached a hand out to Yamada, who didn't hesitate to hold it. Izuku listened to Aizawa's heartbeat and calmed his breathing, not crying anymore. Izuku shook Yamada's hand to get his attention, and when he did, Izuku pulled his hand away before signing something. "Light, please." Yamada understood, leaning over Aizawa to turn his lamp on. Izuku relaxed, slumping forward against Aizawa when he could see the room more clearly. He felt better, the nightmare fading from his mind now. Izuku felt a nudge against his arm and looked over to see Bastard sitting there. Izuku huffed and used a free hand to pet his head. Aizawa hummed, amused. "Bastard came to get us. I think you've unlocked some other personality of his, kid." Izuku smiled and patted Bastard on the head. They sat like that for a bit longer. Aizawa pulled away slightly so he could look down at Izuku. "Are you feeling better?" Izuku nodded, and he rubbed his eyes, still exhausted. Now that his mind was free of the post-nightmare fog, he could logically put together what had happened. He must have fallen completely asleep earlier, and either Yamada or Aizawa moved him to his room. "Okay, kid, do you think you can go back to sleep?" Izuku hesitated this time before nodding. He felt safer, but he didn't exactly want to be alone. He got used to not being alone at night when Yamada would lie with him at the hospital. But he wasn't sure if he should bother them with this. He had his own room now, so he couldn't sleep in their room all the time. Aizawa, always picking up on Izuku's moods, of course, noticed something was wrong. Instead of asking him, though, he simply made a suggestion. "Do you want to sleep in our room tonight?" Izuku clenched Aizawa's sleeve, unsure. But Aizawa wouldn't offer if he didn't mean it, right? Izuku was too tired to overthink this. He nodded, signing, yes. Soon enough, Izuku was settled between Aizawa and Yamada in their bed. He was covered in the blanket, and he snuggled up against Aizawa. Yamada lay behind him, and he placed his hand on Izuku's arm, letting him know that he was there. Both cats were asleep at the end of the bed. Izuku went to sleep with no issue, and luckily, no nightmare woke him up this time. Chapter 11. It was early morning when Shoyuta woke up. The sun was just rising, and Shoyuta mourned the fact that even when he didn't have patrol, he couldn't get himself to sleep in. He had taken a few days off from patrol, so he could be here to help Izuku settle into their home. He hadn't told his agency that was the reason, but they were more than happy to give him the time off. Shoyuta didn't even remember the last time he asked for it. Right now, Izuku was still lying against his chest, sleeping soundly. His husband was turned the other way, soft snores escaping his mouth. Usually, Hisashi was the early riser, so it was nice to see him sleep peacefully. Shoyuta relished in the moment, running his fingers softly through Izuku's hair, careful not to wake him. He looked down at the end of the bed, and Bastard was already awake, staring at him. Shoyuta raised a brow, and Bastard stretched before hopping off the bed gracefully. Shoyuta rolled his eyes and looked back down at Izuku. He was still fast asleep and probably would be for a while. That was good, since he had a rough night. He took a few more minutes before deciding to get up. Shoyuta carefully unwound himself from the kid, handing him a pillow to cuddle instead. Luckily, it worked, and he didn't wake up. Shoyuta went to the other side of the bed and leaned down to kiss Hisashi's head. Shoyuta made his way to the bathroom and freshened up. He kept his cat pajamas on and quietly walked downstairs. Shoyuta started the coffee maker and went to grab his work bag that sat by the couch. Sitting down, he took out Izuku's notebooks. He had gone through them every night he came home from the hospital, and still, he had no idea what was written in them. Shoyuta had done some heavy research into it, too, and still nothing. On some pages, though, there were doodles. It vaguely looked like a person in different fighting stances, and Shoyuta wondered if they were supposed to resemble Izuku. He wondered, not for the first time, if just asking the kid about them was a good idea. His coffee was done, so he put the notebooks away for now and went to grab it. He made a pot for Hisashi since he knew he'd probably wake up soon. Shoyuta sat on the couch, just using the time to relax. Bastard eventually joined him and tolerated Shuta's pets for a bit until he wanted down. Shoyuta briefly wondered if the cat was going back to Izuku. He was still surprised at how quickly Bastard warmed up to him. He was also glad, though. He wouldn't know what to do if the cat hissed at or scratched the kid. Sometime later, he heard soft footsteps padding down the stairs. Shoyuta turned, and Hisashi came into view. Hisashi immediately went over to him and leaned down to kiss him. Shoyuta smiled and stood up to face him properly. "The kid still asleep?" Shoyuta asked. Hisashi nodded. I'll make breakfast. Should probably check on him soon so he doesn't wake up alone." Just as Hisashi was about to go to the kitchen, Shoyuta grabbed his arm. "Do you think I should ask him about his notebooks?" Hisashi's eyebrows raised. "Still can't crack him?" Shoyuta sighed and shook his head. "Nope. I swear, it's complete gibberish." Well, I don't know. If you think it's the best course of action, go ahead. Just be cognizant of his reactions." Shoyuta nodded and let him go start breakfast. He finished his coffee, then went upstairs to check on the kid. Izuku was stirring when Shoyuta entered the room, so he slowly sat on the bed. He was right. Bastard was lying next to the kid. Shoyuta shook his head in amusement. "Morning, kid," he said quietly when Izuku's eyes opened. Izuku looked up at him, his eyes still thick with sleep. "Morning," the kid mumbled, and he rubbed his eyes. Izuku was struggling a bit to sit up, so Shoyuta helped him. "Zashi's making food for us. You can take your medication after, okay? It'll help." Izuku nodded. "How's your pain level? Do you think you could walk to the bathroom?" Shoyuta let the kid decide what was best for him. After a moment of the kid probably figuring out his limits, he nodded slowly. "I think so. It doesn't hurt too bad. Will you be there?" Shoyuta didn't hesitate. "Of course. I'll be with you the whole way, promise. If you need a break, don't hesitate to let me know." Izuku nodded. He took a deep breath before getting off the bed. Shoyuta held his hands under the kid's arms to steady him, and when Izuku said so, He let go. The kid was standing fine for now, and he started walking towards the door. Shoyuta followed closely behind him, ready to be there if needed. Izuku was taking it slow, but that was to be expected. He made his way to the bathroom door, and Shoyuta waited outside for him. It took a while, and Shoyuta was considering knocking on the door to check on him before the door opened. He was relieved, but he could tell the kid was struggling a lot more now. "I'm proud of you, kid. You did a lot." Izuku blushed under the praise, but didn't say anything. Shoyuta knew he'd have to help the kid with accepting compliments. It felt hypocritical, since Hisashi always told him to accept compliments, but whatever. Shoyuta carried the kid down the stairs. Hisashi turned to look at them and smiled widely when he saw Izuku. "Morning, listener. Did you sleep well?" Izuku nodded and smiled back at Hisashi. His moods were always infectious. "Right on. Breakfast will be ready soon." Shoyuta brought Izuku to the couch and sat down next to him. "Kid, do you remember any notebooks that were in your cell?" Well, one way to bring up the subject was just to be blunt about it. He could feel Hisashi's stare on the back of his head, but he ignored it in favor of watching Izuku's expression. He looked shocked. "Uemyai, I thought they were left behind." Izuku tilted his head in confusion, probably wondering why he brought this up and how he knew about them. "Oh well, I actually have them with me. Here, do you want to see them?" Now Izuku looked disbelieving but also excited. "Why you have them? Really?" Shoyuta nodded before taking them out of his bag. He set them on the kid's lap, and he just lit up. "Wow, I can't believe you had these." He started flipping through the pages, eyes roaming over them. Shoyuta let him examine the notebooks some more before asking him, "Do you mind telling me what's in them?" "You don't have to if you don't want to. They are yours, anyway." If the kid decided to keep it from him, he wouldn't be mad, but he would be a little upset. He has been so curious as to what they were, but Shoyuta valued the kid's privacy above his own needs. If he guessed correctly, this was probably one of, if not the only, thing that Izuku was able to keep to himself at the base. Izuku hesitated, hands hovering over the notebooks before he looked up at Shoyuta. "Some of them are my analyses on different villains at the base. And most, though, are about me. My quirks. Before I was, taken, my favorite thing to do was analyze heroes and their quirks. Kurogiri had old ones at the base and gave them to me. At first I didn't want to write in them. I was in too much pain to really use them. But they became my refuge in that place." Shoyuta didn't interrupt him, but he was a little surprised. Don't get him wrong. He was glad the kid had something for himself while he was there, but he didn't expect it to be something like this. "I wrote them in code because, well, I was scared Kurogiri would take them away and show Sensei. I couldn't let him do that. I wrote many, theories about my abilities. If Sensei knew my full potential, he would have done so much worse." He ended in a whisper, and Shoyuta grabbed his hand to ground him. Izuku shook himself out of it and continued. "They probably just thought it was nothing important. So I continued doing it. Kurogiri didn't care when I kept asking for more notebooks. He was weirdly happy about it." Shoyuta hummed, wondering what Kurogiri's motives were. "How do you come up with that code? It's impressive." Izuku blushed and ducked his head. "Ah, thank you. Along with notebooks, Kurogiri would sometimes give me books to read. He told me it was because I had to get some form of education. Most of the books were about different languages. I put them together, along with some other symbols I created." Shoyuta just breathed out in astonishment. This kid. That's, wow. I mean, Shoyuta was at a loss for words. He could tell Izuku took it the wrong way when he curled up a little and apologized. It's weird. I know. I'm sorry." Shoyuta shook his head. No, not at all, kid. Like I said, it's impressive. I'm just so amazed that you could do that in your situation. Don't apologize." Izuku glanced up at him, shocked. Shoyuta felt angry at everyone who told this kid otherwise, who made him think his passions were weird. Shoyuta wrapped an arm around him, and Izuku relaxed against his side. "Thank you," he whispered, and Shoyuta smiled. Just then, Hisashi called them over for breakfast. They were eating, soft conversations going on between Hisashi and Izuku, when Shoyuta spoke up. "Hey kid, do you think you could tell Hisashi and me about your quirks? No pressure, but it may help you feel better about not losing control." Plus, it can help us help you strengthen your control over your quirks. The kid didn't outright object, so that was good. He looked to be contemplating it. Oh, okay, but can we go outside? It'll be easier to show you. Shoyuta and Hisashi both confirmed that it was fine. Besides the aerokinetic one he knew about from the lab notes, he wondered if his first quirk also had something to do with nature. Of course, listener. Whatever you're comfortable with, Hisashi said kindly. Izuku relaxed at that and continued eating his breakfast. Like always, Izuku didn't eat much. Hisashi and he wouldn't push it, though. They didn't want the kid to get sick. They would just have to be patient and hope Izuku recovered enough to eat more. After the two of them finished eating, Aizawa gathered their plates. Izuku was adamant on putting his own plate away, too, wanting to help out since Hisashi made food. Shoyuta huffed. Fine, kid. If you're gonna do it, at least let me help, he said and put the plates he had down on the table. He then picked Izuku up and held him on his hip like Hisashi did yesterday. Izuku used an arm to hook around Shuta's neck to hold on to him, his free one holding his plate and utensils. Shoyuta brought them into the kitchen with the plates he managed to grab. He put them in the sink and leaned down slightly so Izuku could put his in, too. Just when Shoyuta was about to bring them both back to the dining room to get the remaining dishes, Izuku's eyes caught on something on the wall beside the sink. It was their calendar. Shoyuta wondered for the first time if Izuku even knew what the date was. As if to confirm his thoughts, Izuku asked, Hey Aizawa, what's the date today? It's September 20th. And what's the year? This question was asked with a little more hesitation. Shoyuta froze. He didn't jump to conclusions, but if this is what he thought it was, Shoyuta was suddenly realizing just how much he didn't ask Izuku about how long he thought he'd been with All for One. Shoyuta kept his voice neutral when he responded, 2090. Now, Izuku was frozen in his arms, and his eyes were losing focus. Shit. Kid. Hey. Shoyuta called out, trying to make eye contact with him. He wasn't responsive. Zashi, he yelled as he left the kitchen. Hisashi immediately came over, noticing Izuku's state. What happened? Hisashi asked frantically, holding his arms out to hold Izuku. Shoyuta ran a hand through his hair. I messed up, I think. He asked about the date, and then the year. When I told him, he checked out like this. Shit, Zashi. I don't think he even knew how long he's been in there. Hisashi looked distressed, and he brought Izuku to the couch. He sat with the kid in his lap, and Shoyuta sat beside them. It's not your fault, Sho. We never even thought of asking him if he knew. I can't imagine what he's feeling right now. How long did he think he was in there? Hisashi started whispering. Shoyuta didn't have an answer for that. They sat with Izuku, trying to ground him back to the present. In the process, Bastard and Sushi had appeared. Sushi was curious, but kept his distance from Izuku, sitting with Shoyuta since Hisashi's lap was taken. Bastard was the complete opposite. He immediately made his way onto Izuku's lap, staring up at him like he knew what was going on. Bastard meowed and curled up on Izuku, and to both the heroes' astonishment, started purring loudly. This cat just keeps surprising them. Izuku was struggling. He kept falling into flashback after flashback, and he hated it. He wasn't sure what was real or not anymore. He was back in his cell. It was cold and dark. Abruptly, his cell door slammed open, making Izuku jump. In the doorway was the doctor. Izuku tensed, immediately curling into the corner to get as far away from the man as possible. Midoriya, the doctor said in a sing-song voice, and Izuku felt himself starting to panic. Why was he here? He never came into his cell. Suddenly, Aizawa's voice filled his mind. What I do is think of anything that seemed off about the nightmare. It could be a person who's not supposed to be there, or sometimes the place you're in is not fully developed, so only one part of it is completely visible. If you happen to look into a mirror or something where you can see your reflection, it may look off, maybe blurry. Did you notice anything like that? Izuku analyzed the dream with a little more clarity. He wasn't here, it wasn't real. Nevertheless, the doctor still instilled such a deep, debilitating fear in him. It was hard to relax with him here. He took some deep breaths, telling himself over and over, this isn't real, this isn't real, this isn't real. Izuku didn't move from his spot, and he didn't listen to the doctor's voice. It seemed like forever before he felt like opening his eyes. When he did, he was somewhere else. No, he was in Yamada and Aizawa's home. He could feel arms around him and a weight in his lap. Izuku blinked, trying to remember what brought him to this point. He was in the kitchen with Aizawa putting his dishes away. Then, the calendar. Right. Izuku asked about the date. He was curious, but he realized he had no idea what year he was in. Back at the base, he had no way to tell time. There was no window in his cell to tell when the sun rose and set, and he was always inside, besides the off chance he was allowed out. He figured that a significant amount of time had passed, yes, but he never had an accurate sense. Food was never consistent, so it wasn't like the first meal he always had was breakfast. Training and experiments were erratic. Most of the time, it depended on Sensei's moods, and those were never regulated. By the way his body grew, Izuku estimated 2, or at most 3, years had passed. But 4 years? It wasn't horribly longer than his guess, but knowing for sure was different. The two heroes must have noticed he had come back to the present because Yamada's arms tightened around him slightly, and Aizawa leaned forward from his spot. "Kid, you back with us?" Aizawa asked him, and Izuku nodded. At the same time, he realized it was Bastard that was in his lap, and he started petting him. Ah, that noise was Bastard purring. Yamada rubbed Izuku's arm. "Do you want to tell us what happened?" Izuku took a moment to collect himself and his thoughts. Back there, I never had any sense of time. I had guessed, but I was off. And Izuku sighed, his body slumping against Yamada. "It's hard to understand completely how long I was there for." Izuku trailed off, still petting Bastard absent-mindedly. "That's understandable. 4 years is a long time. And I'm so sorry that you had to endure that for so long," Aizawa said, placing his hand over Izuku's free one. Izuku sniffled and wiped his eyes with his sleeve. He just wanted to move on, but something as small as the date was setting him off. He was frustrated. Aizawa squeezed his hand. "I know that look on your face, kid. Don't be mad at yourself for this. You went through horrific things, and healing won't be linear. But Hizashi and I will be here for you to get you through it." That did make Izuku feel better, but he still felt lingering bitterness at himself. Aizawa took his hand away and stood up. "I'll go get your pain meds for you," he said and ruffled Izuku's hair gently before leaving. Yamada kept his hold on Izuku, which he felt was very comforting. Izuku would think that after 4 years of non-consensual and harsh touches that always brought pain, he would have more of an aversion to it. However, Yamada and Aizawa have only been kind to him, and at this point, Izuku craved it. Aizawa came back with the medication, and Izuku took it with the glass of water he also brought over. He found that he did genuinely want to show Yamada and Aizawa his quirks, but he wanted to just relax for now. He was sure the heroes also picked up on that, so they stayed in the living room for a while. "Do you want to watch something, little listener?" Yamada asked him, and Izuku thought about it. "Can we put on an All Might documentary?" he asked hesitantly. Izuku did tell Aizawa that All Might was his favorite, and there was no negative reaction. Back at the base, though, there was such hatred for heroes, and especially All Might, that any mention of him from Izuku got him in trouble. He learned very quickly to never bring up the #1 hero. "Of course, I'm sure I could find one easily," Yamada reassured, and Izuku relaxed. Okay, he wasn't a taboo topic. They spent the next hour or so watching a documentary, and Izuku will never get over his excitement and fanboying of the hero. He was just so cool. This was the perfect thing to put on. He felt a lot better already. Even Aizawa was paying attention to the documentary. Izuku wasn't sure if the hero was a fan of All Might. He would say probably not, just because of how much Aizawa values the underground scene. So this was interesting to him. Yamada seemed to notice, too, and teased the hero about being soft, whatever that was supposed to mean. When it was over, Izuku felt a little more energized. All Might was just so inspiring. He sat up in Yamada's hold, startling Bastard and making him jump off. "Can I still show you my Q quirks?" "Of course, baby. If you're up to it, we can go outside," Yamada said and lifted Izuku from the underarms into a standing position. Aizawa stood up next to him, holding his hand. Yamada stood on the other side, also holding his hand. "Will you be okay to walk? How's your leg?" Aizawa asked him. Izuku cautiously tested his leg by putting slight pressure on it. He didn't feel overwhelming pain, so he thought it was probably fine. Yeah, let's go. Izuku didn't think he'd be so excited to do this. The only time he's used his quirks was for training strictly controlled by Sensei. Ever since the suppression cuff had come off, he felt weird. He couldn't remember the last time he had it off for so long. His quirks were very loud inside of him, but after a few days, they had subsided and just existed. It was a strange sensation. Even when he developed his first quirk, he had to get used to it. In the first few days of getting his second one, he felt constantly exhausted, like both of the quirks were fighting for his energy. It wasn't quite like that now, though he did find himself getting bouts of exhaustion sometimes. The three of them made it outside in their backyard without an issue. Izuku wasn't sure if it was because of his quirks, but every time he was outside, in nature, he just felt rejuvenated. How would you like to show us, kid? Aizawa asked him. Izuku hummed and looked around their backyard. It wasn't too big, so he wouldn't do much. Just stand here, Izuku said and let go of both of their hands. He steadied himself and took a few steps back. He could stand by himself for now, so this would be fine. When Izuku reached out to his quirks, it was like a rush of adrenaline hit him. He tried not to get them mixed up. He didn't have much practice using one separate from the other yet. Izuku focused on the ground around them. He pulled up with his hands, and parts of the earth jutted up around him. Looking at Yamada and Aizawa's shocked expressions, he pushed them back down, and the earth went back to how it was. Izuku was a bit nervous. He had never shown anyone else what he could do. That was just part of it, but he wasn't sure what else he'd be allowed to show. The other one is new, so I am not sure how well I'll be able to control it, Izuku warned, and Aizawa nodded at him. He'd be ready to erase his quirk if it was needed. Izuku took a deep breath and let his eyes flutter closed as he felt the wind around him. He had to admit, this was somewhat easier to handle back at the base because of the lack of wind currents in the training room. He took hold of the current, opening his eyes and creating a mini tornado. He then shaped it into a sphere that hovered in his hands. So far, so good. Yamada and Aizawa watched him in awe, and Izuku couldn't lie, it felt nice. The villains always had malicious interest in his quirks, especially Sensei, who exploited them with every chance he got. Izuku tried to make the air sphere go away, but it only got bigger. His eyes widened, and he quickly looked to Aizawa, who didn't hesitate to erase his quirk. The man's quirk would never not amaze him, and to have it used on himself was jarring but cool. Izuku released a breath when his quirk was cut off. Thanks, Izuku mumbled, and the heroes steadied him when they noticed how much he was slumping over. Those are some quirks you got there, kid. Have you ever had the chance to use them outside? Aizawa asked him, simultaneously picking him up so he didn't have to stand uncomfortably. Izuku shook his head and latched onto him. No, only inside. Sensei would sometimes turn the training room into different environments, but it was artificial. Being out here, it's more power than I've ever felt. Yamada placed a hand on his back. Well, looks like we have to go outside more often then. It helps you feel better beyond just your quirks, yeah? Izuku was surprised that he noticed. He guessed it wasn't that hard, seeing how much more tranquil he felt when he was out here. I feel more when I'm out here. With my first quirk, it's like I can feel the earth moving and the vibrations underneath the surface. It's a weird sensation. I bet, little listener. If you're up to it, show and I can look into getting you proper training. Izuku flinched at the word choice. He knew that was not what Yamada meant, but he couldn't help but feel his body lock up at the suggestion. Yamada noticed and immediately looked regretful. Sorry, kiddo. I should have chosen a better way to say it. It's nothing like that. At this stage, we'd probably only work on your control. See how much you can do without experiencing quirk exhaustion. Only if you want to, though. We most likely can't do too much right now, anyway, with your physical therapy. Izuku laid his head on Aizawa's shoulder, thinking about it. It did feel good to use them just now. To not have to be pushed until he passed out. To just freely use his quirks with no reprimand or punishment. With professional heroes like Aizawa and Yamada helping him, he may just want to do it. Okay, I want to, Izuku said, feeling more determined. Aizawa ruffled his hair with a small smile. You're very brave, kid. For now, We'll work on strengthening your arm and hand muscles. You probably have to use your hands a lot for your quirks, right? Aizawa asked him, and Izuku nodded in confirmation. So we'll need to work on that. That'll be the first step in mastering control. Izuku could feel tears building up. God, why did he cry so much? He didn't think he'd ever get used to their kindness. He was never given these choices, so he thoroughly appreciated it. Thank you, he said in a shaky voice. No problem, listener. We are here to help you, Yamada said kindly, rubbing his back. Aizawa just tightened his hold on him, whispering reassuring words in his ear. Izuku cried it out, and they brought him inside again. Throughout the day, they took it slow. His physical therapy still left him sore, but he could feel a stark difference. He didn't feel as nauseous when eating, so that was good, but he could still only eat small portions. Aizawa suggested that he have healthy snacks as the day went on in between meals. This would make up for the small amount he would eat, and he wouldn't feel overly hungry by the time lunch and dinner were made. Izuku liked the idea, but it would be a lot to adjust to. When night approached, Izuku felt nervous. He didn't want last night to happen again. Aizawa carried him to his room, Yamada and Bastard close behind. Izuku guessed that Bastard sleeping in his room would become a normal occurrence. When he was set down on his bed, Aizawa patted him on the head. Do you want to leave the lamp on? It may help. Hisashi and I can get you a night light for future nights, Aizawa suggested. It did sound better than sleeping in a completely dark room, so he nodded. Bastard hopped onto the bed and made himself comfortable in the space next to Izuku. Maybe Bastard would help with his lonely feelings at night. Sho and I will also just be right across the hall, okay? We know the past few weeks have been a big change, so don't hesitate to come get us, Yamada encouraged. Regardless of being told this, Izuku still felt bad for interrupting their sleep if he were to do that. Izuku compromised with himself. He would try to sleep alone, but if he undoubtedly couldn't handle it to the point of panic, he would get the heroes. Okay, Izuku confirmed, and both of them said good night to him before leaving. Aizawa was about to shut the door, but Izuku called out. Wait. Aizawa stopped and turned to face Izuku. Can you, leave the door open a little? Please. It reminded him too much of the cell when the door would constantly be closed. This door wouldn't be locked, but it would make him feel a lot better. Aizawa nodded and left the door slightly open. Of course. Good night, kid. Sleep well. Yusuke said good night and got comfortable in his bed. Izuku was lying on his side so that he was facing Bastard, who already seemed to be sleeping. Izuku pet him softly so that he wouldn't be disturbed. After a bit, he could feel his limbs relax and sag into the mattress. He kept his hand on Bastard and slipped into sleep. Chapter 12. It had been a couple of weeks since Izuku had shown Shoyuta and Hisashi his quirks. The kid hasn't used them since because he focused more on his physical therapy. Progress was going very well. The kid was able to walk short distances without getting tired. His grip was getting stronger. Izuku could write or color longer than he used to, but there was still a long way to go. His hands would shake, and his arms would get sore or hurt easily. If he needed significant arm and hand mobility for his quirks, he would have to get a lot stronger. The second night went a lot smoother than the first. The kid hadn't come to their room or woke up panicking from nightmares. They got him a night light, and he seemed to be a lot more comfortable sleeping alone. Well, alone with Bastard. Along with the night light, his hero posters, figures, and blanket also came in. Hisashi and Izuku hung up the posters, and Izuku chose to place the present Mike figurine on his bedside table. Hisashi tried to hide it, but Shoyuta caught him wiping away happy tears when the kid wasn't looking. The other All Might figurines were placed on his desk and bookshelves. Oh, yeah, and that Eraserhead merch that Hisashi promised him? It was a blanket with him on it, striking a fighting pose. Izuku was ecstatic. Shoyuta less so, but seeing the kid so happy made him happy, so he didn't comment. There was only one night when Izuku woke up screaming, thinking he was back at the lab. The scream had triggered Shuta's instincts, and he had to keep himself from running to the kid's room to wake up Hisashi first. He takes out his hearing aids every night, so he didn't hear it. It took them almost all night to get the kid to calm down and go to sleep. There hadn't been any episodes like that since then, but Shoyuta couldn't lie and say he slept soundly after that night. Now, They were running into an issue. Izuku's wardrobe. It was basically Shuta's whole closet, and while the kid looked absolutely adorable in his baggy clothes, it wasn't practical. He needed clothes that would fit him and not swallow him. For shoes, Hisashi chose a pair of green slides for the kid to be comfortable walking around the house. It wasn't the best option for the outside, but it was all he had for now. Hisashi, of course, suggested a shopping day. Shoyuta thought that was a terrible idea. Not only was Izuku not used to crowds of people, but he couldn't walk for that long. Shoyuta asked why they couldn't just do online shopping, and Hisashi argued that Izuku should be able to physically feel the texture and fabric and know the exact size of the clothes he wanted. They concluded that they would ask the kid what he wanted to do. Izuku seemed hesitant, but ultimately decided he wanted to go shopping. Underneath the hesitancy, Shoyuta could see the kid's excitement to go out. Of course, he couldn't say no to that, so he would just have to keep an eye on the kid's well-being. If Izuku did start getting exhausted or his legs ached, Shoyuta would take out the wheelchair they had kept from the hospital. They left it folded in the back of their car. They didn't have to bring it inside yet, but there was a lot more walking involved at a shopping mall. For the outing, Shoyuta gave the kid something to wear that didn't completely drown him. It was the same black sweater he gave the kid initially, along with black sweatpants that had to be rolled up a couple of times so they didn't go past his feet. Still baggy, but not terribly so. Izuku put on his shoes and waited patiently for the heroes to finish getting ready. Well, for Hisashi to finish. Shoyuta had just thrown on an all-black outfit and his capture weapon around his neck. He was fine, but Hisashi loved to take his time dressing up, no matter the occasion. 10 minutes later, Hisashi waltzed through the hallway towards them. "Are you guys ready?" he exclaimed enthusiastically, luckily without his quirk activating. "We were ready 20 minutes ago," Shoyuta grumbled, but stood, helping Izuku up as well. Hisashi waved him off. "It takes time to look this good," he huffed and crouched in front of Izuku with a smile. "Listener, I hope you're excited. Just remember to tell Sho and me if you need a break, all right? We'll shop at your pace." Hisashi reminded him, and the kid nodded in confirmation. Hisashi sprang back up with energy Shoyuta wished he could muster. "Let's go." Hisashi quickly slipped his shoes on, and, after making sure the cats weren't around to dart out of the house, he opened the door and ushered them outside. Shoyuta had a hand on Izuku's back to help him forward until they got to the car. After Izuku was in and buckled, Shoyuta walked around to the passenger's side and got in. Hisashi started the car, and they were off. Izuku still watched the outside whirl by in fascination. The window stayed up this time, though, because it was getting cooler around this time of year. The leaves were turning all shades of reds and browns. Shoyuta distantly wondered about the upcoming winter. While it didn't get crazy cold, he was still worried about how Izuku's body would react to it. He would have to keep an eye on it once the time came. The mall was busy, but that was normal. If it were overcrowded, he probably would have told Hisashi to turn right back around. Hisashi found a parking spot relatively close to the mall entrance. Hisashi turned the car off and went around to help Izuku out. "You ready?" he asked, and Izuku nodded eagerly. Hisashi held the kid's hand and led him forward. Shoyuta followed beside Izuku, eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "So, listener, any idea on what you want to look for?" Hisashi asked curiously, looking down at him when they made it inside. I dunno. I like what Aizawa gives me," Izuku muttered, burying his face into the collar of his sweatshirt as if to accentuate the point. Since it was getting colder, it was a good idea to get warmer clothes. "We can find something like that for you. Come on." Hisashi steered them a different way. Shoyuta marveled at the fact that Hisashi knew the layout of the mall by memory. They ended up in a kids' clothing store that had an abundance of clothes for the fall and upcoming winter season. Sweaters, sweatpants, jackets, long socks, hats, mittens, etc. This was perfect. You look for anything that interests you, okay? You can try it on, or, if you don't want to, we can eyeball it. Worst comes to worst, we come back to return it some other day, Hisashi explained as Izuku looked around in wonder. Izuku faced them tentatively. "Anything." Both the heroes nodded. "Anything, kid. If you like it, grab it," Shoyuta reassured him. Izuku still looked uncertain, but he nodded anyway and went to start looking. Hisashi had let go of his hand to let him wander. They both stayed a fair distance away so they could keep an eye on him, but also give him his space to browse. Izuku checked out the section of sweatshirts that had printed graphics on them. In true Shoyuta fashion, Izuku reached for the sweatshirt with cats on it first. "You're rubbing off on him," Hisashi whispered to him, tone teasing. Shoyuta scoffed and hid a smile in his capture weapon. "You say that like it's a bad thing. Kids clearly got taste." Izuku grabbed a couple more that had different designs on them, then sauntered off to another section. Looking at pants now, Izuku picked out solid colors. One black and one green. Shoyuta thought he was being very minimal, but he wanted to let the kid pick out everything first before pushing him to get more. One thing was for sure, though, he would need a winter coat. Izuku came up to them nervously with the small pile he had accumulated. "Is this good?" Hisashi grabbed the pile and placed a hand on the kid's head. "Of course, listener, but you totally need more than this." Izuku looked like he couldn't believe it. "More! More!" Hisashi parroted and motioned for Izuku to follow him. He did, Shoyuta close behind. "Here, pick out a few t-shirts as well. It is getting cold, but for just lounging around the house, it couldn't hurt." Izuku seemed skeptical, but started looking through them anyway. Again, he only chose a couple of black shirts. Hisashi, when the kid wasn't looking, added to the pile. He chose a variety of shirts in different colors and styles. When Izuku eventually noticed, he became flustered. This is too much. "Really, I am fine with what I have," Izuku said, clenching his sweater in between his fists. Shoyuta crouched in front of him and laid a hand over Izuku's. "Kid, I promise it's not enough. We are essentially starting from scratch to give you a full closet's worth of clothes that will last you. Have you seen Hisashi's wardrobe? I mean, come on. If anything, he's the one that needs less clothes," he joked, earning a small smile from Izuku and an outraged squawk from Hisashi. "If it's really okay," Izuku trailed off, still unsure. "We promise it is. If you truly ever went overboard, which I highly doubt will happen, Hisashi and I will let you know." Okay. Then, can I get these?" Izuku asked while pointing to a pair of cat-printed socks that looked suspiciously a lot like sushi. Shoyuta huffed a laugh and grabbed them. Of course. While they had that conversation, Hisashi had grabbed a basket and filled it with more clothes. How he even did that much in that amount of time, Shoyuta will never know. "All right, listener, let's go through these together, yeah?" Izuku only rejected one shirt out of the whole pile, and it was because the texture on the inside felt scratchy. Other than that, they were pretty much halfway there to a decent amount of clothing. The only thing Shoyuta picked out for the kid in that store was a puffy black jacket that had a fluffy inside. The kid approved immediately, and it was added to the pile. They went to a couple of more stores after that one. Izuku picked out a bunch of graphic tees, some of which had Shoyuta questioning his earlier statement that the kid had good taste. But whatever, these weren't his clothes. The issue they ran into was the shoes. Izuku was born quirkless, so he had an extra toe joint. This unfortunately meant that he had a limited option for closed-toed footwear. The most common brand that some stores carried was the obnoxiously bright red sneakers. Other than that, there wasn't much choice. Shoyuta didn't want to settle for making the kid wear shoes that would make him uncomfortable, so he had an idea. "I could probably ask Power Loader for some shoe designs. He could make it an assignment for his class, or something." Before Hisashi could respond, Izuku lit up. Power Loader. He's so cool. His costume designs are the best." Shoyuta was impressed. Not many people knew Power Loader or his costume designs. "Yeah, you'll have the coolest shoes ever, Izu," Hisashi exclaimed, smiling brightly. Izuku blushed at the nickname, but was still vibrating in excitement. Shoyuta knew exactly where to take the kid next. He shared a glance with Hisashi. Even though no words were spoken, he was sure his husband understood what Shoyuta was thinking. They brought the kid to a hero merch store. Izuku looked like he was about to explode or pass out from exhilaration. Maybe both. Izuku tugged Hisashi inside, and Shoyuta had to laugh. If bringing Izuku here would have taken him out of his shell a bit more, Shoyuta would suffer 1,000 more shopping trips. Izuku was truly in heaven right now. This store was huge. It had something of almost every hero Izuku recognized in here. From keychains to clothing, This store had a lot to offer. Izuku could spend hours here alone. Yamada was still holding Izuku's hand when he dragged him in. He felt kind of bad, but with Izuku's lack of strength, he figured Yamada let himself be dragged in. Aizawa was following them, and Yamada suddenly stopped and turned to him. "Sho, do you mind shopping with the kid for a sec? I need to go to the bathroom." Clearly, Aizawa didn't buy it, and neither did Izuku. Before either of them could question him, though, Yamada was already sprinting off. Izuku looked at Aizawa, bewildered. He just sighed. "Don't look at me, kid. Hisashi does as he pleases," Aizawa deadpanned. Izuku giggled and latched onto Aizawa's hand instead. "Can we look around?" Izuku asked, suddenly nervous. Aizawa didn't seem to enjoy crowds too much, and it was a bit more packed in here than in other stores. But Aizawa just nodded. "Wherever you like, kid. Go crazy." Well, Izuku didn't have to be told twice. Izuku led Aizawa around the store, gazing in wonder at different merchandise items. He knew that the heroes insisted he choose things for himself, but hero merch was more expensive than regular clothes and items. He didn't want to overstep. At the sight of a "Put Your Hands Up" radio shirt, though, Izuku couldn't resist. He grabbed it. Aizawa seemed amused. "You'll give Zashi a heart attack." In a good way. Izuku wasn't sure how someone could have a heart attack in a good way, but he didn't question it. When they got to the aisle full of hero figurines and action figures, Izuku knew he'd be here a while. He browsed the different heroes, Aizawa occasionally pointing them out and asking if Izuku knew them. The answer was pretty much always a yes. After a bit of looking, Yamada still wasn't back, so they hung around the store. When Izuku was looking at different pins and keychains, Aizawa's phone started buzzing. Aizawa's brows furrowed, and when he looked at the caller ID, he sighed. "Just one sec, Izuku. Don't go anywhere." After Izuku confirmed he'd stay put, Aizawa took just a few steps away. Far enough to keep his conversation private, but close enough to keep an eye on him. Izuku continued browsing. He had one Kimui Woods keychain, and he saw a really cool All Might pin he wanted to look at, but it was unfortunately just out of reach. Even on his tippy toes. A hand came up from behind him and grabbed the pin he was aiming for. Izuku jerked back, startled, and the action caused a sharp pain in his left leg. Holding back a flinch, he looked up to see a woman with dark red hair and square-framed glasses. "Here, sweetie. Is this what you were looking for?" she asked him, and Izuku hesitantly nodded. The woman handed him the pin, and Izuku's fingers shook as he grabbed it. "Thanks," he whispered, and the woman gave him a bright smile. It wasn't the same as Yamada's, though. Hers felt weird. "No problem. You a big fan of All Might?" she asked, hands on her knees as she leaned down to talk to him in that condescending way adults usually did to kids. It reminded him way too much of the doctor. Izuku didn't like this interaction anymore. He looked over his shoulder to see Aizawa still on the phone, back slightly turned to him. Of course, the one time the hero wasn't overly aware of his surroundings. Izuku looked back at the woman who was still expecting an answer. Not sure how to politely leave, he nodded. Why yes," he muttered, hands twitching and leg aching. "What kid doesn't these days? I swear, my son just raves on and on about All Might. He always talks about his fights." The woman rambled on, but Izuku wasn't listening. He felt like he was watching this conversation from outside of his body. Then, suddenly, the woman touched his hair. Izuku was slammed back into awareness, his entire body locked up. "What a cutie you are. Do you want to meet my son? I feel like you two would have so much in common. Where are your parents? We could set up a play date." She wasn't letting go of his hair. It was similar to how Yamada and Aizawa played with it, but the sensation was all wrong. He couldn't move. He couldn't tell her to take her hand off of him. Then, a voice behind him, deadly calm. "Get your hand off my kid." Aizawa was finally done with that phone call. And furious. Luckily, it was not directed at him. The hand was finally gone, and Izuku slumped in relief. So much, in fact, that he almost fell over. Aizawa immediately picked him up, and Izuku hid his face in the man's shoulder. This person either had no self-awareness or no self-preservation, because she talked as if nothing was wrong. "Oh, you must be his dad. I was just talking to him about how much my son also loves All Might. and that they'd probably be great friends. Not interested. And that was that. Ignoring the woman's offended scoff, Aizawa turned on his heel and promptly made his way to the register. He paid for the shirt and the keychain and asked Izuku if he still wanted to pin. While he loved All Might, he shook his head. It had a stained experience attached to it now. Aizawa didn't question it and placed the pin on the counter for the employee to put back. He thanked them, then walked out of the store. Yamada was still gone, so Aizawa sat on a bench outside the store and rubbed Izuku's back in comfort. Izuku's hands were tightly holding onto Aizawa's shirt, trembling slightly. "Are you all right, Izuku?" Aizawa asked him quietly, and Izuku didn't know how to answer that. While he was glad to be out of the situation, he couldn't get the feeling of her touch off of him. When he didn't answer right away, Aizawa spoke again. "I'm sorry for not paying attention, kid. That never should have happened." Izuku could hear the frustration aimed at himself. "And not your fault. I didn't stop her," Izuku murmured, playing the conversation over and over in his mind. Aizawa's throat made a sound, and in a gruff voice, he said, "No, she never should have touched you in the first place. That's not on you." Izuku turned his head, so he was looking up at Aizawa. "Then it's not your fault, either," Izuku said, trying to be firm in his words, but it probably didn't come out that way. Regardless, it did the trick, as Aizawa seemed more relaxed. His features softened, and he sighed. "Ah, fine. You make a good argument," Aizawa said with a small smile. Izuku mirrored it and sat up in his hold. He felt a little better now, even if the conversation was lingering back in his head. Before they could say anything else, Yamada appeared. "Sorry that took so long." "Here," he said, pushing a shopping bag into Aizawa's arms. Izuku curiously peeked inside. They looked like pajamas. He grabbed one, taking it out of the bag. They were very soft and had different kinds of cats printed all over them. Looking through the bag, it looked like there were 3 sets of them. "Zashi, you didn't," Aizawa said, his voice sounding infinitely tired. "I did," was all Yamada responded with, and Izuku giggled. Izuku put the pajamas back in the bag. "We can all match." Izuku smiled, his bad mood from earlier melting away. "Yeah, show? Come on, you secretly love it." Yamada placed his hands on his hips, an eyebrow raised in what Izuku thought was a smug expression. Aizawa didn't confirm or deny, just grunted and placed the bag with the rest. Yamada smirked and saw the shopping bag from the Hero merch store. "What did you get, little listener?" Yamada questioned, sitting on the bench next to them. Izuku faltered slightly, his mind immediately going to his earlier interaction. Yamada noticed, though, his lips downturned in a frown when he noticed the abrupt, tense atmosphere. What happened? Before Izuku could say anything, though, Aizawa waved a hand dismissively, saying, "Later." Izuku was grateful for it because he didn't think he could handle explaining it. Yamada looked upset, but he didn't push it. Izuku instead took out the "Put Your Hands Up" radio shirt, and it was like Yamada's demeanor never changed. He was glowing with that smile he radiated. "Oh, listener." He placed a hand over his chest, tears welling up in his eyes. Although Yamada had given him a present mic keychain the first day they met, he always had this reaction whenever Izuku picked something out resembling the hero. Izuku smiled and showed him the Kemui Woods keychain he also got. Yamada and he chatted a bit about Kemui Woods, his mood slowly becoming better. Aizawa stayed a steady presence as he continued to hold him in his lap. When there was a lull in conversation, Aizawa spoke up. "Do you want to eat here? Or at home?" They both waited for his response. Izuku laid his head on Aizawa's chest, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over him. "Home," Izuku whispered. The heroes didn't waste any time. Yamada held all the bags while Aizawa held Izuku, taking him to the car. It was nighttime, just after Shoyuta and Hizashi put the kid down to sleep. It was easy, since the day tired him out. Hizashi and he were now sitting on the couch, TV on but volume low, Sushi sleeping on Hizashi's lap. "What happened earlier?" Hizashi asked him, voice quiet. Shoyuta sighed, feeling his anger spike as he thought about it. "Sakachi called me. I stepped away, kid still in my sight, but I looked away for just a few moments. This lady." Shoyuta paused, regaining composure before he accidentally started to raise his voice. She was standing too close to the kid, talking about something, but she was touching him. Her hand was in his hair, and all I could see was how Izuku was shaking. He was favoring his right side, so I knew his leg was bothering him, too. I told her to get her hands off him, and she did, but she continued speaking like nothing was wrong. Something about her kid and All Might. I had to leave before I made a scene. Hisashi looked gradually more upset and angry as the story developed. His fists were clenched, brows furrowed. God, what is wrong with people? He whispered, shouted. Poor Aizu. Shoyuta ran a hand through his hair, still feeling guilty about not being aware of the situation instantly. Hisashi bumped their shoulders together and pulled his hand away from where Shoyuta was unknowingly gripping his hair. Don't do that. It's not your fault, Shodash. Shoyuta interrupted him. What if it's not just a stranger talking to him, touching his hair, next time? What if he was taken? I wouldn't have noticed until it was too late. Hisashi sked and placed his hands on either side of his face, forcing Shoyuta to look at him. You of all people should know how dangerous it is to think about the what-ifs. He's fine, he's safe. He's with us, in his room, fast asleep. Okay, don't go down that path, Hisashi said, firm but not unkind. Shoyuta just sighed, tension bleeding from his shoulders as he leaned into Hisashi's touch. He nodded, but otherwise didn't say anything. Knowing that was probably the best he'd get from him, Hisashi changed the subject. What did Sakachi call about? His hands left Shuta's face and instead wrapped around his shoulders. Shoyuta scowled as he thought about the call he had with Sakachi. They found and arrested Hisashi Midoriya. He was apparently outside last night, rampaging about his son, according to witnesses. Now, though, he won't speak a word to any of the officers or Sakachi. Hisashi tensed at the mention of Izuku's father. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Hisashi spoke. Are you going to talk to him? I was thinking about it. Sakachi said he might recognize me and finally open up. What do you think? Hisashi shrugged. I think it might work. But you have to make sure you don't accidentally say anything about Izuku's whereabouts, in case he somehow gets it back to All for One. Shoyuta nodded. I know. I won't say anything about him. I'll go tomorrow morning. Is that fine? You can tell the kid I'm on hero business. Which is technically true, but you know. Yup. The little listener and I will hang out, he said, thrilled, and probably already coming up with ideas for the two of them to do. Shoyuta smiled and leaned into his husband's side, not exactly excited for tomorrow, but cherishing the current moment despite it. Chapter 13. Izuku woke in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, breathing heavily. He dreamed that the doctor was the one touching him in that store, not the red-haired woman. He figured it was inevitable since their mannerisms were too alike. Instead of panicking more, his eyes found the present-like figure on his bedside table, and with the faint glow of the night light, he felt himself relaxing. Izuku took deep breaths, trying to reassure himself that he was safe. Even though he was having trouble comforting himself after nightmares or panic attacks, he didn't have the luxury of Aizawa or Yamada being there for him in the base. Whenever he woke up scared, he would have to ride it out alone. If he ever had a panic attack in front of a villain, especially Sensei, they would punish him even worse. Well, all except Kurogiri and Dabi, now that he thought about it. Kurogiri was the one tasked with looking after him whenever he wasn't with the doctor or Sensei. He was never harsh, and he never punished him when he was having a panic attack. Kurogiri wasn't exactly helpful, but he would be there. Dabi, on the other hand, was interesting. He was scary, but he never actually hurt Izuku. There were rare times when Izuku would see Dabi in his cell. They didn't really speak to each other, and Dabi had a weird look in his eye whenever he came across Izuku. Not quite guilt, but not malice either. Thinking about the two, surprisingly, didn't push him into panic, as thinking about the base usually did. He just rolled onto his other side to face Bastard, who was awake and watching him. Izuku hummed softly and began petting the cat, which resulted in loud purring. I don't get Aizawa or Yamada's warnings about you. You're just a cutie, Izuku murmured, eyelids heavy. What even was a bastard anyway? That was the last thought he had before drifting back to sleep. The sun rays woke him up this time. He felt peace for the first time in a while, and he just continued lying there. Bastard was now curled up against his chest. Izuku was wearing one of his new clothes, and while he enjoyed Aizawa's sweaters, this was also comfortable. At night, he still got cold, regardless of being covered in blankets, so he would wear a sweatshirt to sleep and pants. He never got overheated, and it was comfortable, so he continued doing it. He stayed there for a few more minutes before a soft knock at his door sounded. Izuku shifted so he could look at the door over his shoulder without disturbing Bastard. The door was pushed open more, since Izuku still kept it slightly ajar at night. Yamada appeared in the doorway with a small smile. "Good morning, listener. I'm about to start breakfast. Do you want to join?" Usually, every morning now, Yamada would ask Izuku to accompany him while he made breakfast. He would only cook alone if Izuku were still sound asleep. Izuku hummed an affirmative and started to sit up. He winced slightly at his straining muscles, but he sat up on his own. Bastard meowed offendedly, jumping off the bed and walking out with his tail up. He brushed past Yamada, who jumped out of the way, looking terrified. He couldn't help but giggle at the sight. When Yamada faced him with an exaggerated shiver, Izuku sighed. "Scary."